Welcome. This is the Late Late Show with BT, where views with security and law are being provided to you, the public. We will be reading from Town and Country, April 2016, Ebony, July 2015, Red Book, September 2015, Parents, February 2017, Women's Day, November 2015, American Fitness, September, October 2015, and Maxim, November 2015. And the book we will be starting Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. So I have no idea how long it's going to take to finish this. Hopefully we will get to finish it because it's not a bought copy. So we are going to start it today and see how long it takes us to finish it. Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. And there is a movie out on DVD that is of the same name. Some updates. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I used to work when I was in college, a store in a mall. And upon thinking about different experiences and different things, events that happen in the hip hop community and um, in other communities, in other states, I felt that it would be appropriate to inquire and to have an interest in this mall being the site for the show. Um, However, I haven't been able to confirm whether this is a fact or not, but when I looked on the website, the store is still there. So I don't know how long, if it's in the near future, if it's in the far future, if it's going to be abandoned, the idea is going to be abandoned, but or if it's a rumor, or if it's false news. But one of the major stores in this mall um, might be leaving the mall. Um, and the interest, not saying that another store couldn't fill its shoes, but it was included in the interest. So that's one update. We mentioned that the show that there's a trial going on right now, and just a little information about that. If you have or have not, you caught the visual that's used for the show, so you know that we have an interest in baby friendly, and with that being a very family friendly show, and the way that we approach certain topics in our communications. But that being so, the flip side of it, that's the not so good part, is that it's we I found the show has found that we be up against challenges such as sex offenders and child molestation and offenders who attempt to sexually offend this community, babies. Um, Things, you don't like to think about that stuff being true or happening, but I found that we be up against those type of offenders, um, and it finds itself in sometimes looking like they're attracted to adults when they're still those type of sex offenders. Um, and this trial, we're up against one of those type of offenders, and this offender has been attempting to come after, a family for over 20 years now, and it's, um, it. We would like to think that it's coming to a close because the enemy is defeated. Victory is already claimed. But that's what the trial entails. There's a sex offender that is attempting to charge us with, when in ours we were just defending our community from this offender's, sex offense and violation. So that's what we've been up against. We go to trial in August. Another interest that the show has taken and has had an interest in, being that we're of law, we value both sides of the law. When you go to law school, there are some classes that it may be required, it may not, but there's a class that's similar that could be titled criminal law or criminal justice. And so when it comes to criminal justice, we tend to value, with regard to criminal justice, five families. The five families. If you are not familiar with the five families, the internet, of course, is available to learn more about them. There are five families that was organized for criminal, that community for, no other description in New York. And those five families are Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, Bonanno, and Lucchese. So when I started doing this show, I became very understanding of who they are, how they came to be, how they are able to be public with who they are and why they are. And I felt as though this show is one of the reasons that they are able to be public with who they are and why they are. We are with security. And sometimes, when it comes to criminality, you cannot, being the godly person that you are, fight with godly people. You have to fight with the bad that God has given you. That's the bad that God has blessed you with. That's why you're supposed to value and accept and understand and comprehend the good and the bad. You accept the good, you accept the bad. And that's kind of who we are. So there are a few members or heads that are currently incarcerated in the federal penitentiary system. And I feel as though that shouldn't be the case, because I think that they have always been up against sex offenders. And it has always been a situation where they had to defend not only themselves, but community and communities like the ones that we serve. There are 3 that are currently serving life sentences, and 1 that is scheduled to be released in 2019. Even though it's 2019, that's a couple of years away, we still are in as soon as possible, and we still do not support the current life sentences of the ones that have been given life there now. It takes, it's like, what they were so terrible. They were such a destruction to society. And, but when you are up against and you get what you're up against, what we have been up against, in terms of violators and sex offenders, it becomes necessary to have criminals that um, that can, be the protectors in their criminality, that can keep away, that can have those boundaries, enforced. Sometimes, that, it's more than about being in the streets and being gangsters. Sometimes it are boundaries, so we have been non-supportive of the life sentences. And I haven't gotten into a lot of what has been put out there about the cases or why they were put in there. But just knowing um, and understanding the culture of New York and understanding this show, and we started this show in New York, and understanding what that means being from the state that I'm from. We can only support the life sentences being whatever the proper word is. I don't know if it's rescinded, reversed, overruled, whatever that proper word is, in order for them to get out and, represent the five families properly. It's like when you don't know yourself, I feel as though they were up against not knowing who they were, just regular humane stuff, not knowing who you were or what you were doing or why you were doing it, and just having to survive in the unknown, you know. But like when you don't know, when who knows you shows up, then, it should become clear, who you are and why this was, and that they all have peace as the five families, and stand alone, and that they are strong individually, and that they are strong together, and that they've always been for community, and that they've always been for united. It's, I, when it comes to security, when it comes to law, when it comes to policing, and when it comes to city versus local versus state versus national and versus united, I don't know if you can really grasp and understand what it takes to um, to remain united and to keep united and to have that peace and to establish boundaries, and I don't know if you can grasp sometimes when you are locally and when you can't see beyond that, when you can't see beyond what's going on in your city or in your town, and it's bigger than you, or you're a judge in that city and it's national and you can't see it, when something's going on with something, and it's over your head, literally, like, just again, I'll repeat it again, when you're, in that city, or when you're local and it's national or it's continental, um, in those situations, you're not really competent to make a decision or to judge in those situations because you cannot see what's going on. And it's not a situation where you can make people give you access to what's going on. It's like you can't make someone, it's like you want to make someone break into somebody else's safe so that you can feel safe, but you don't care about the other person being safe. And it just doesn't happen like that. And I think, it's time for these representatives to be released. Um, Two other comments before we start. I went to see Alvin and the Chipmunks road trip today. That was our destination. And I became very nostalgic for family after seeing it. I wanted, and it's not my immediate family, but my better half's family. I was like, I wanted my better half's family here, right now, near, like move. And there's another one I'm going to see, Shipwrecked, tomorrow. And I just know that I'm going to feel the same way tomorrow. And Eleanor's Theodorable is just so cute. She always gets me with that. And one last update is that I did reach out to the Make It Right Foundation. Familiar with Make It Right? It's a foundation that helped out Hurricane Katrina victims in New Orleans with housing. I brought it up in a show where it was introduced. It was introduced in the show. It came about, one of the recipients of their services was like, I have one of those, such and so and so houses. And that is where, then I looked it up to see where it was. So I contacted them because of a local situation. It's in a suburban neighborhood, but it's not in the best of shape. So I contacted them to see if they can contribute and bring their services here. I know it's not like a hurricane situation, but it's still a housing and a healthy home situation in which they consider themselves to be for healthy home revitalization. And so I contacted them this past week with regard to that. And I'll keep, I'll update on that as well. And I did contact the mall, a representative of the mall, one representative of the mall to kind of see if we can get the ball rolling, to see if it's possible. Maybe we can present something. Maybe I can be asked to present something. Maybe, who knows, that they're open to doing something different with the property and to have a different perspective as to their offerings. So that occurred today as well. So we're going to get started. "65% say your ideal bedtime is 9 or 10 p.m., but 70% say your actual bedtime is 11 p.m. or later." And I guess that could be because you go to bed at one time, but then you just, I know for me, like I may go to bed, but then like I'm up praying or, talking things out in prayer aloud, or, you know, on my phone, texting, or not really texting, but, doing some last minute things that I could do, but just sometimes you just in prayer, and then, you you fall on into your slumber after that. But I don't have an ideal bedtime. Sometimes, I go into the next day and I don't go to, I find myself not going to sleep for 2 days, and it's, you know, 7 o'clock in the morning and I'm sleeping until 1 or noon. I don't know. So, I don't really have an ideal bedtime, and doing this show, the show is proposed at being, since we've been airing it live, it's been during the day. But the show is supposed to be doing the late night show. But the reason why I'm not being a stickler is because the hours doesn't accommodate it being, broadcast live at that particular time, and because it's the internet. And so even though it may not be midnight where I'm at, somewhere in the world it's, around that time. Thing about, broadcasting live on the internet. The best new cocktail. Because we know how sad it is to be introduced to your summer Chardonnay, we asked our mama mixologist Kim Hasserud for some help easing the transition. I have my certificate in bartending, but I'm still not a cocktail person. I've and I granted I don't think I've made every single cocktail. It's just not one of my favorites. Trick out your space like a total boss with finds that work just as hard as you do. Master the bedroom. I would spend anywhere from $79 to $150 on tickets per person, and I like to bring a family member or a close friend with me. I grew up listening to Broadway cast recordings and fell in love with stories told through music. Amanda Malloy Marone, Shelton, Connecticut. Crystal Payne, the founder of MoneySavingMom.com and author of Money Making Mom. Waiting to board a flight back to the U.S. after being in South Africa on an amazing ministry trip, I spotted a pair of blue and green locally made earrings in the airport store. I'm not one to impulse shop or buy souvenirs, but these have my name written all over them. I've worn them countless times since, and when I look in the mirror wearing them, I fondly recall that first trip halfway around the world in the beautiful country I fell madly in love with. There's nothing like recognizing your name all over something, or your signature all over something. It's such a moment. Kimberly Clark, New York City. I see that table every night before I go to bed and every morning when I get up, and every time I look at it, it's all sunny days and positive thoughts in my brain. Melissa Walker. And Amanda Steinberg, Philadelphia, CEO of DailyWork.com. But then I saw 3 teenagers in tears because they didn't have the $200 to get their car out. Jessica Press. My mother whispered, "You'll just get 10 more minutes of fun with these, but they'll have weeks of joy with them. So hand them over." 5 years ago, when I took my then 2-year-old daughter to restaurants, I started noticing that the free crayons we left behind were swept into the trash, she says. She was struck by the wastefulness, so she approached managers of the restaurant she frequented in her hometown, Los Angeles, asking if they'd be willing to collect crayons after diners left. Some of our students come from homes that don't have any art materials. They're just not in the budget. Crayon collection's impact is transformative, she explains. Because of crayon collection, children who are shy at first begin to open up and build confidence in and enjoy their work thanks to these powerful tools of self-expression. I think I used to really like that. I remember going to places and they have the little games on the table that you can play, and sometimes they have the little crayons. And to this day, Five Guys and Burgers, five, Five Guys, Five Burgers. I think it's Five Guys and Fries. Of Five Guys and Burgers. Five Guys and Fries currently do that. They have the crayons and they have, you know, the, you know, the paper or whatever that you could use to crayon. I remember that. Like it adds something to just the environment. Like, you know, you were thought of. Even if like the family was thought of. Like even if you don't have any children, or even if you are, it's like that community was thought of. Even if you're for the community, you can pick up, you're a child at heart, or you're for the community, or you're family focused, you can pick up a crayon and just start using it. Like you don't have to be a kid. Yeah. Um, be tested for HPV. So I think I have to get tested for going. Hopefully things will work out, but you got to get all these immunizations and all these tests done to, I thought I was going to go ahead and stay on campus and just try that whole thing. That didn't go so well last time I stayed on campus. So I thought against it. So I remember the lady saying that, especially because you're staying on campus, you need this just by being amongst all the students at a more majority of the time. So, it's just a lot to it. And you have to get your blood test. Then you have to get tested to see when this was done, how it was done, when you need to get it done again. It's a lot. I just don't remember having to go through all this when last time I went to school. Jessica McGalla, we're not going to tell you to cleanse or pick up a single bottle of green juice. This is the shortcut to better health we've all been waiting for. Summer may be in the rearview mirror, but the bloating and sluggishness that come with too many frozen margaritas and funnel cakes is not. And the phytonutrients can help repair cell damage caused by too many bad choices. By that, we mean nutritious, satisfying stuff. A protein-rich smoothie at breakfast, a broth or puree-based soup for lunch, and a hearty stew and salad for dinner. You can have solid food. Back to school and play. Mary Jane Meakin, MD. Get ahead of the bloat. Recently, one called and asked what she could do about bloating. We're not entirely sure why this trio works, but it seems to have diuretic properties, meaning it makes you pee, and it may block the activity of the hormone prolactin, one potential cause of bloating. So I remember, like, I don't remember being, feeling bloated now. I used to work at this company that I got fired from. And I think when I was working there, I used to feel bloated. But that's one thing, like when I got into fitness and I started understanding things, like especially health wise, you'll be surprised how many, by being in a certain environment or being in a certain community, how certain things are attached to that. It's attached to this community. It's because everybody that works here suffers from this or gets this or got this, and so I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not, but I think I was working there when I would feel, you know, a little bloated during that time of the month. But um, that's one thing that haven't really had any problems with. Like, and you're like, and I think this feeling is what bloating, being bloated, the bloat or whatever. I think this is what they try to attach to it. But anyhow, Nikki. A cuff and a great bag turn the simplest outfits a little edgy. I'm not really a bag person, but when you're a woman and it's that time of the month, it's that's the only thing about that time of the month and going out, because you have to have some type of bag. Like there's no other way to get around it. Like not being a bag person is like, if I have a, and I don't want to be the type of person where she must be on her, like it must be that time of the month because she got a bag with her. I don't really want to be that type of person, but if I'm that type of person, then I might just be that type of person. Christine. Things with movement like capes and caftans make me happy, but I always belt them to show my waist. Finance pro Nicole Lappin says, all you need is an LPD, a little budget diary, that is. In fact, research shows that people who actively budget tend to make better money decisions in general. Do what I do and call it your LBD, your little budget diary. The sum has to be less than your total income. Here's another way to keep your LBD honest for the first 2 months or so. Go to the ATM at the start of each month and take out the exact amount you budgeted for your extras. The idea of making a custom tailored LBD is not to be restrictive, but to be more comfortable moving money around and making it work for you. Plus, you budgeted for the unexpected, so you won't feel bled dry by a last-minute emergency. So I would think that, I was like, well, when my man gets here, he's gonna be that guy. Like that's gonna be his thing in the relationship, the finances, you know. That's gonna be his thing. And I'm still like that a little bit, like I just, I am just totally not like doing the budget thing. I'm not checking the checkbooks, like, like doing all, I'm not like a stickler when it comes to that. I'm just very loose with it, you know, and I just feel like my other half is gonna be more of a stickler, gonna wanna, this is the budget, we can't go outside of this. This is the amount that we can spend like this month, the next month, and so on. Because I need that balance, and it's like if it's not there, then is it a third party that has it, Anyhow, a bit of boho trim. Tiffany Blackstone, Deputy Editor. Here's one thank E and one light pick, both totally satisfying. Lauren Groff's Fates and Furries is a literary portrait of a long, perfect marriage from his POV. Dinners. 25 of the best back-to-school lunches for kids. I don't ever remember having I don't ever remember anything in my lunchbox. I think I remember having a lunchbox with nothing in it. And I do remember pizza, like on Fridays or something like that. Like, oh, I couldn't wait for that day just so I could have my pizza. But I remember that through high school though. So I don't know if it's the same pizza from elementary to high school. Deciding the best way to make it. The best way to make it is with each other. Reveal brighter skin with rice powder. Tour the latest beauty technology. The latest beauty technology. If I had to use any type of the latest beauty technology, it would have to be something that has to do with the removal of hair. But not, like something that's the only thing that I can think of. Something that will remove hair. Because sometimes, I like the peacefulness of shaving. I never waxed because and it sounds so painful. Not that I wouldn't do it, but shaving can be so tedious and so long-winded sometimes. Michelle Crouch. Since budgets are likely to be an obstacle, you'll boost the odds of success if you can offer a solution that's cheap or even better, free. Go beyond the classroom. That's because this wildly popular game has helped spark grade schoolers' interest in the science of coding. Outings to aquariums, botanical gardens, zoos, and state or national parks can also bring scientific principles to life. It's better to spend half an hour deeply engaged with one scientific idea. Maybe one day all you do is watch the busy honeybees. See if you can find out what's under the floor at an ice skating rink or behind the pins at a bowling alley, suggests David Hale, our editor of Family Science. While studies show that about as many girls as boys have a positive attitude towards science in elementary school, boys are twice as likely to be interested in technology, science, and math by 8th grade. I think that is kind of interesting. What's under the floor of an ice skating rink? What's behind the pins at a bowling alley? I never thought that that would have anything to do with science, math, or technology. When I went to the movies today, they the one of the previews were showing these technology geeks or guys that this guy had this concept for this floor, and he hadn't even made the floor, and he had to seek out people to build the floor after he got the interest for it. And it was some type of floor that when you dance on it, it lights up and it feeds off the energy of the people dancing on it. And that energy keeps the lights going and keeps it working and moving, you know, um, and it attracts the interest of some of the people, that like to club hop and go to clubs, because it's sort of put out there like an attraction of this club, you know. So what's under the floor of an ice skating rink? That has something to do with technology or science or even math. And what's behind the pins at a bowling alley? Like that has something to do, like it's technology, science, or math that keeps the pins up or makes them fall a certain way or attracts the ball to a certain pin or away from a certain pin. Interesting. It just was never presented to me that way in school. So I never really had a passion for it, you know, um, a passion for that science or, after a certain grade level, math just started getting not interesting anymore. Like I had a passion for it up to a certain point, and they just lost me. You know, science. Like I didn't have science in elementary school. It wasn't even here until high school. So, it's like, I guess like anything, you want to maybe have those, maybe that's where sometimes parents comes in, where you can input those little things into your child's life or imagination at a young age because sometimes it's not happening in the schools. Coding isn't only for big kids in the basics, like learning, because in effect, in problem solving, don't have to be mastered on a computer. So they're saying that coding isn't only for the big kids in the basics, like learning, cause and effect, and problem solving, and that you don't have to master it on a computer, such as Wired to be Charming. Evidently, this is called a Wonder Workshops dot, where you can turn it into different things, such as a Magic 8 Ball. It's for 6 years and older, and it's only $50. And there's apps on it, such as iOS, Android, or Fire. Wired to be Charming. Jessica McGowan. When Thompson eventually took Rachel back to the hospital, the toddler finally received a proper diagnosis of asthma and started getting the treatment she needed. If you belong to a parenting group on social media, usually private or secret groups made up of moms in your area, you know the drill. A mom posted health-related questions such as, does this picture of my child's mysterious rash look bad? Or should I start my self-ode on rice cereal or sweet potatoes? This is just a new way to do it, says Natasha Burgett, MD, a pediatrician in Kansas City, Missouri, who runs the blog KC Kids Doc. More than half of mothers and a third of fathers discuss parenting and child health issues on social media, and about 75% of parents say being part of online groups helps them feel less alone. Reports discovered by the University of Michigan C.S. Mott Children's Hospital. A few queries that are just about perfect for posting. Troubleshooting milestones like potty training, finding creative snack options, comparing when to start giving an allowance, searching for local kids events, swapping dinner recipes, and seeking recommendations for pediatricians. Of Noblesville, Indiana, knows how easy it is to be steered wrong. By the time her appointment arrived, her baby was crying constantly. Feeding her was more important than trying to breastfeed. Their intentions were good, but their advice encouraging. People chimed in with suggestions about how my son should take cinnamon pills, eliminate gluten, and try breathing exercises, the Denver dad remembers. For college, the best response I got was, I know what you're going through. Mom has a child with eczema doesn't mean she will be able to diagnose it in your child or tell you all about the best available treatments. What you can do, think twice before asking a stranger for definitive advice you'd normally ask your doctor for, says doctor. This rule holds especially true for complementary therapies such as essential oils and supplements that may not be regulated by the FDA. The biggest thing I learned is that other moms have plenty to say about everything. Well, I think that, when you're a parent or a mom, that I get why you would want to reach out to other parents or other moms and, you know, to not feel like you're the only one going through this or that your child is the only one going through it, but just to hear some experiences from other people that you feel are going through the same thing that you're going through. But the thing is, it's such a unique experience being a mom and being parents. It's unique, and sometimes that's not really something that you can do. Sometimes the best thing you can do is be in a community such as parents and not necessarily hope for the best, but just staying alert and asking to be aware in it. William Bryant Miles. Not only is Serena one of the best in history, but that black cat suit is now memorialized in the museum at the International Tennis Hall of Fame in Newport, Rhode Island. And given that summer adds emphasis to the tennis season, what better time than now to get reacquainted with the stars who have ushered in the change? Going way back hand, blacks tennis in the 20th century. At age 28, she demolished barriers when she became the first Black person to win a Grand Slam, one of the world's largest tournaments, the Australian, French, and U.S. Opens and Wimbledon, taking the women's singles title at the 1956 French Open. By the time he died in 1993, he had given to countless causes, including constructing a tennis facility in Soweto, South Africa, for Blacks who could not play in white establishments during the apartheid era. Their hairdos and the outfits only served as a spirited backdrop for the real party trick, a brutally aggressive, athletic manner of play that 20 years later is now the standard for the game. In the sisters' formative years as pros, they faced competition from an effective player, once ranked inside the world's top 10 in both singles and doubles by the Women's Tennis Association, or WTA. And James Blake was ranked as high as number 4 in the world by the Association of Tennis Players, ATP, the organization responsible for global rankings in men's tennis. 22, a burgeoning star, has the distinction of having beaten Serena during the 2013 Australian Open quarterfinals. People have been trying to retire me since I was like 25. I'm not getting out of here. This is a thrilling time for African Americans who love tennis to be front and center, and for the new wave of Black players firmly standing on this rich legacy. There couldn't be a better time to elevate the game. Arthur Ashe There's a picture of Arthur Ashe on his way to becoming the first African American to capture the U.S. men's single title at the 1968 National Tennis Championships. Doubles partners Serena and Venus Williams after winning a point in a 1999 match, and Sloane Stephens at the 2013 Australian Open. Now, I've never heard of Sloane Stephens, so that's the first. But tennis, I tend to like the idea of tennis. I haven't had a good partner to play with or so I haven't really begun. Like I would start going and just hitting it up against the wall at the place, and then it just stopped because it just got a little, you know, boring. Oh, one other fact. 2002, Venus Williams becomes the first Black female player to be ranked number 1 by the Women's Tennis Association. Again, I like the idea of tennis. The back and forth, doesn't even bother me when you get into the sport of tennis. Kimberly Seals Allers. The company also serves as a social movement aimed at rebranding what it means to be a geek, donating $4 of every sale to fund science, technology, engineering, arts, and math programs in underserved communities. The overall crowdfunding industry is estimated to grow to nearly $34.4 billion this year, up from $16.2 billion the year prior. The minds behind the app Cosign know all about that kick. The two raised $41,500 in 31 days for their innovative platform, which allows users to earn money by turning their selfies into digital storefronts. Everyone is an influencer, and if your authentic style persuades others to buy a product, whether it's your clothes, home decor, or beauty product, you should get compensated for that. You have to be willing to ask your friends, then ask them to tell their friends every day. Also learn how to use public relations to boost her campaign. Both put in 2 to 3 months of prep work before their campaigns even launched. So, I was thinking about this show and, will it, like, if going, national, international, global, or continental, will I still be able to, say these are our sources, this is what we're reading from? Will we still be able to have that, I didn't start off doing it that way. And should it just come up like credits, but anyway, just keeping the authenticity of the show, and that courage to stand, will it be that, will it be that easy, or will you have to have the courage to stand firm in it? Jacqueline L. Yates. Targeting that center color is always going to be ideal because sometimes if you are darker around the perimeter of your face, the foundation has a tendency to gray out if you blot it toward the hairline and jaw, says Wilson. For your contour, use one shade darker in the way of a bronzer that isn't necessarily too reflective, the beauty expert advises. The biggest thing I want to stress when it comes to creating eyes and the no makeup look is to use colors found within your skin, says Wilson. The great thing about bronzer is that it can also be used on the body. Mix a little bit of your liquid highlighter into your body lotion. And stay on trend with these very rare beauty finds. So I know we're talking about bronzer and color, but I can't help but to think of Donald Trump. When I look at Donald Trump and I look at his eyes and I look around, there's circles around his eyes, his face is a different color. I'm wondering, is he going in the tanning booth, putting on those goggles, and that is why. Even if that is so, it seems as though there should be someone on staff that can do the makeup. It seems like there's nobody on staff that can do his makeup in a way that blends his skin tone. So it's like, you have all of that money, or whether you're on a budget or not, but you still haven't factored in anybody to do that aspect of your life. Why is that? Who has that in his life? And I would say that you need to find that person. That's who you need to be with, because clearly it's not Melania. The best part. We are committed to changing the way men approach their grooming routines and lifestyles through outstanding service, a comfortable place to escape, and memorable grooming experiences, says co-owner Christopher Butler. The full menu of services includes haircuts, styling, shaving, hand and foot treatments, facials, massages, and waxing. Whether you're getting a beard trim, haircut, or hot towel, straight razor shave, rest assured that every service will be done with care. The best part. The best part. Virginia. The best part. And Goodman, Jacqueline L. Yates. Crafted in collaboration with the Italian Society of Pediatric Ophthalmology, the specs are not only stylish, but they also help promote healthy optical development during the most formative years. Tippy Shorter, the brand's global artistic director of texture care, explains, the tighter your spirals, the longer it takes for oils from your scalp to travel down to your ends. The big, curly, intensive detangling mask helps fight frizz and define curls. Sir John partners with a beauty giant. Gregory Cornelis, PhD. We often point fingers at those unwilling to demonstrate peacefully, but the true dilemma doesn't start with the uprisings. Here are some difficult facts. According to Justice Department statistics, Black people are 31% more likely to be pulled over by cops while driving than whites, and 3 times as likely to be subjected to a body search and vehicle check when stopped. 24 years before that uprising, civil unrest erupted in cities across the nation following the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Is it really hard to believe that the children and grandchildren of those who participated in these protests, still faced with frequent incidents of state-sanctioned violence, will have the same reaction and show their frustration in similar ways? I guess the question is that even though we are years and decades after what happened with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that is it hard to believe that some people would still, um, you know, be violent or want to, react and show their frustration in certain ways and through certain uprisings. Um, You know, I find that to be, going, and I still say going because it hasn't come to pass yet. So hopefully, everything is going to work out, going into HBCU, after having going to a school that's not an HBCU and having, beliefs of being united versus, you know, the we shall overcome type perspective. Um, I which is another reason why I look forward to it because, of knowing that there are still children, there's still grandchildren of those who found themselves in the protests, found themselves marching, found themselves being activists, feeling as though they lived it, they've been through it, but being united was united when this was going on, but um, when people grow up and are born in or when it's like they feel like as though they grew up in a war zone, it becomes then you find yourself in a challenge to have them see a different way, you know. So it's not hard for me to believe because, you're talking about years and decades of them experiencing things in their frame of reference. And, um, it's just that when you ask, is it hard to believe? Then in that perspective, then, it's like on the flip side, I think that you should also ask, is it hard to believe that ones that were born in peace? If you grew up around this and someone else grew up, in a peaceful environment, or just got a peaceful mentality, even if they, I'm not saying that I haven't witnessed violence. I'm not saying that I haven't been in communities that, you know, where or that I haven't witnessed, being wronged by police. But when you do that, have you have to have perspective when it comes to the truth. So you can't let, an offender's attempt to overshadow the truth, skew like or try to change or impact who you are. Like you have to be grounded in the truth with regards to peace. Erica and Goodman. This summer, $2 billion and 20 years later, will for the first time play the role of Luther Stickle, a sharp-tongued, slick-dressed computer hacker in Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, which hit movie theaters July of 31st of the 2015 year. As the only actor to be cast in all of the Mission franchise flicks, has been a constant and one of the highest grossing series to ever hit the US box office. But this will be the final adventure for the notorious, will this be the final adventure for the notorious Impossible Mission Force IMF agents? Mission is a great gig for the actor, but there has never been a time when the Harlem-born Juilliard trained thespian wasn't working. The Bible says many are called and few are chosen, and I know God has chosen me to do this work. So I haven't really, maybe I've seen one of the Mission Impossibles, but I kind of feel like this whole thing with the show and this whole thing with two different communities colliding and coming together, security and celebrity, it kind of makes me ask that question, is it Mission Impossible? It was just kind of feeling like Mission Impossible a little bit, because you have these people that, it's like they have this perspective, and it's not entirely grounded in truth, but it's grounded in, but it's like it's grounded in a way that that community needed to be safe in or needed to survive with, um, for it to meet, the truth about it. Erica Ann Goodman, alluring whether in a red carpet frock or in her uniform, the WNBA's female fatale and Tulsa shot guard defines her style as tomboy chic. Beyond the hardwood, the princess of Rock Nation Sports is a mogul in the making, juggling duties as the founder of the Reach for the Sky Basketball Camp Tour, nurturing aspiring young b-ball players, managing endorsements, and hosting a new celebrity online talk show, 4040 Live. Jamie Foxx is heading back to the big screen. The talented entertainer has been tapped to star in the action flick Blink. So let's see if that has already hit the stores. It could be on DVD. So nothing's coming up about it being out, just still that it's in the works. The Big Easy's bounce music scene has a fearless leader in Big Freedia, arguably the biggest star to come out of the genre. Although the very concept of gender fluidity still often needs to be defined and defended among African Americans, for Freedia is very simple. She is a man who uses female pronouns when discussing herself as a performer. With her to discuss what it means to be embraced by hip hop and, of course, twerking for salvation. With Michael Arsenault. But within the bounce genre, there are already trans rappers such as Katie Red on the show. Now you have a hit reality show. You're working with artist and producer Diplo. You've been touring nationally and internationally and have written a book. You must be exactly where you want to be. But Andrea Atkins. What Kathy witnessed firsthand in her hometown is happening all over. A study found that 41% of work absences among the working poor are caused by transportation issues. I see moms coming to the shop with no heat or no brakes and kids in the back. So I guess it's important to know your area and know because sometimes public transportation doesn't go everywhere, and sometimes public transportation doesn't provide transportation during certain times, and sometimes they try to do the school thing and the work thing and need transportation after hours, or it's knowing the area from that standpoint, and just ensuring that there are ways even that there are organizations that help with transportation, or maybe there are organizations that would if you went with Uber or Lyft, that they would pay for the cost of Uber and Lyft when you don't have your own car, or that they will pay for the cab, for the cost to a cab company to take you to where you need to go. I just think that there should always, be a way to, especially when you are, doing and being, for the community and for unity, that it shouldn't be hard, and when you have kids, it definitely shouldn't be harder. Not that, people with kids should be given more things, Let's have some kids. Let me have some kids so life can be easier. But necessarily be necessarily be harder. Eat to beat diabetes with Joy Bardardine. But that doesn't mean you have to completely forego your favorite foods. Good fats like omega-3s and monounsaturated fats blunt mealtime blood sugar spikes by slowing the body's absorption of carbohydrates. Jessica McGowan, have a set bedtime. So I already mentioned I don't have a set bedtime. It's for you to have a set bedtime. I imagine, things would be different having children and having a husband and doing a show. The things would be different that it may be a situation where you want to have a set bedtime. You want to get up a certain time, but it's like being in that type of routine, you just want to have the flexibility, you know. So it has to be flexibility even when you set a bedtime. You bring the outside world into your mouth every day, and though most bacteria and germs are harmless, some can make you sick. Good bacteria can enhance your immune system, so you may want to consider taking a probiotic supplement which contains helpful bacteria during cold and flu season. You can reduce illness by 15 to 50% if you remember to wash your hands before eating, before and after prepping food, post bathroom, and after sneezing or coughing. One study found that gentle yoga plus breathing exercises strengthens immune function, and the boost happens within 2 hours after the start of class, according to research in the journal PLOS One. So there's good bacteria and there's bad bacteria. Sometimes bacteria is just always referred to as bad. There's bad bacteria. Bacteria is bad. But there are some good bacteria, and according to this article, it can enhance your immune system. And washing those hands. Sometimes, like I like to keep my hands clean, and sometimes I don't get how, sometimes you see people that are just real loose with their hands and just consume things without washing, don't really think about it, and they pass it on down to their kids, and which I don't think is kind of fair, but and you just wonder, where does that come from, but maybe sometimes, no matter how many times they wash their hands, they figure their nails will never be clean, and they just forget it. This is who I am, you know. Kind of like me with the bag, Maybe that's just who you are. Use this handy Terra guide to troubleshoot turkey game. The best way to tell if your turkey is done is to use an instant red thermometer. Take the bird's temperature in the thigh where it connects to the breast. Donna Duarte Ladd. Snap to buy the products on this page. Raising the bar. Kim Hardy, Marietta, Georgia. I'll never forget the shock and disappointment on my husband's face when I came home in 1999 and saw him at our table surrounded by bills. I closed the business and got a regular job, so we had some steady income and we put ourselves on a tight budget. So it sounds like it's one story of a lady that, said, hey, I wanted to try this, but hey, she saw her husband, she saw these bills and figured out, what? You are more important to me than me trying to pursue something that, just might not be us. Pop-up table decor. Carol Ninehan Morales, Staten Island, New York. I found full-time employment again, but the story helped me see that I was not alone, and there are many others facing the same issues I experienced. Angela Champ, Calgary, Alberta. These will definitely be two of my go-to meals. Kevin Connolly. Kevin Conley. So I thought, let's go back to the foundation of our country, whether we agree with a lot of it or not. Carrie Mae Weems, still with Kevin Conley. The Artist Award-winning photographs, films, and videos often feature tableau, a family around a kitchen table, figures and poses familiar from history, but when Weems herself gets in front of the camera, she can't sit still, arms thrown wide, legs on the table, all in such rapid succession you wonder why modeling is considered a young person's game. Her work has, from the beginning, focused on the consequences of racism, power, and gender inequality, and she is something of an ambassador herself when it comes to promoting her fellow female artists. They were large and dominated the space, she says, still clearly impressed by that and the events. In one of the first embassies built to the new standards in Moscow, AIE installed its first permanent collection with works by 13 artists, including an American of Russian heritage, and 12 glass sculptures donated. That precedent has now been institutionalized, and one half of 1% of the building budgets is set aside for the program. And since the cost of the new highly fortified embassies with their mandatory 100-foot setbacks from the nearest road, their bomb-proof walls and ballistic glass can be astronomical. The price tag of the new embassy in London, slated to open in 2017, is rumored to be nearing $1 billion. The sliver that goes to AIE is nothing to sneeze at. And of course, the biggest budgets go with the largest embassies. One way AIE has adapted to budgetary constraints is by presenting an encyclopedic range of American art, including works by quilters, sculptors, potters, photographers, glassmakers, Native American weavers, lithographers, and muralists. I wanted people walking by to feel as if this facade, this huge wall that divides the people and the embassy, was really not a division but an extension of welcome, Thomas says. In Madagascar, an exhibition of landscapes by two National Geographic photographers provided the occasion for the U.S. ambassador to discuss environmental efforts with the Chinese ambassador. This is a tool that needs to be further exploited. I can't tell you the number of times our visitors have been taken aback. This is not what I would expect in the home of the U.S. ambassador. Kevin Conley. Mary Kay Schilling. Rather than say mission accomplished, Tina Fey has taken the biggest leap of her career, playing a foreign correspondent in the Middle East. Okay. I find myself similarly concerned about overstepping personal boundaries, since Faye is already hunched over our table, quite close in fact, with the sort of posture my grandmother used to tell me would lead to curvature of the spine by age 30. Then again, Tina Fey is living proof that among many other things, 40-something women can top the box office in an R-rated comedy, Sisters or Six film with partner in crime, has grossed $100 million so far. So she could have written the book on that as well. Eventually, as if acclimating to high altitude, I get used to her low volume, which is a good thing. Since Faye's conversation is as punchline packed as her two sitcoms, the Emmy-gobbling 30 Rock and the current Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, each joke followed by two more like a cascade of funny. I feel like this will be the best of the three. We happened to be meeting the morning after the Golden Globes. This was her first year off after co-hosting for 3 years. That meant the mother of two could not only avoid watching every nominated movie, she could retire by 10 p.m. When it's not your gig, you're like, I'm just going to go to bed, she says. Our meeting also comes shortly after Carrie Fisher addressed some brutal online remarks about her appearance in the latest Star Wars movie. Eventually, the 59-year-old actress responded by tweeting, "Please stop debating about whether or not I aged well." I thought it was heartbreaking and also smart of Carrie to be like, "This hurts," says Faye, because a lot of times we talk about the politics of it, the unfairness of it, which is all true. But I think it's clear to people when you go, "Hey, that hurts my feelings." Fast forward to being 68, and it's a glorious act of bravery. She has sympathy for the challenges of getting older, but is utterly confounded by the trend of obliterating signs of aging before they exist. The best she can do, she says, is to try to stay in shape. Because there is never a point where you say, hey, remember those 2 years when Fonda got fat? You just have to keep that baseline. I purposely wore 3 or 4 layers of Spanx underneath, including those terrible nude color ones, because as I crafted the bit, I didn't want people to think I was trying to look good, she says. Since I don't have an aquarium, I'll take her word for it. But today's outfit is indeed high on comfort, low on style. And Whiskey Tango, her and Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, a dark comedy that she produced and stars in, is her 12th film to date. She plays a character loosely based on the journalist Kim Barker, author of the equal parts hilarious and horrifying memoir, The Taliban Shuffle, Strange Days in Afghanistan and Pakistan, in which mind-boggling absurdities pile up almost as fast as the bodies. The New York Times review of the book described Barker as a sort of Tina Fey character who unexpectedly finds herself addicted to the adrenaline rush of war. For that reason, ended up on Faye's desk, and Barker's voice does share a tough-minded confidence and satirical bite with Faye's. For the film, Carlock turned Barker into a cable news reporter, more visual, amped up the romance, Martin Freeman is the love interest, and downplayed the politics. When Robbie read the script, she was struck by the novelty of two confident women who are friends from the jump, who aren't competitive or conniving. Elizabeth Stat Martina Fey grew up the younger of 2 children in the Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, a high-achieving, unapologetic nerd and self-described mean girl. That was a disease that had to be conquered, she once said. She was 2 years out of Second City by then, on the staff of SNL. People really wanted us to be openly grateful. Thank you so much. And we were like, no, it's a terrible time. We really are a generation that is there to work together and not be tricked into thinking we have to backstab each other to get somewhere. They're both loyal, who has written for and with Faye for 11 years, so long that assuming her voice is second nature at this point. She still has fun with the gig, but she's relieved to be, as she puts it, out of the Weekend Update business. On that kind of show, she says, you have to stay neutral, and it will be tough to stay neutral now. A long-time independent, she is underwhelmed by the candidates. It feels very fun to me not to be on it, she says, and maybe it's for the best. When I read that back to Faye, she says, is that still true? Mary Kay Shilling. Eric Konigsberg. The rest come with strange, if not conspicuous, signage. Attached, there is no accepted etiquette when it comes to endowing large institutions, but there is plenty of outrage. All of that to say, but there is plenty of outrage. Eric Konigsberg. One of the best books ever written about the rich, John P. Marquand's The Late George Apley, is not really about money, power, or the things we associate with wealth. George Apley, the gray scion of a patrician Boston family, is looking around at the end of his life and is troubled by what he sees, namely, too much money in the hands of the wrong people, not his. The Apley's defining characteristic in George's eyes is not their considerable wealth, but their values, embodied by the family Rembrandts hanging in the Museum of Fine Arts, the perennial spot on the Harvard board, and perhaps, above all, a commitment to philanthropy, all done with the Apley dislike for external show. After started endowing public libraries in the 19th century, a staggering 3,500 would eventually be built, largely in parts of the world where need was judged to be highest. Mark Twain called the project a shrewd plan not to elevate mankind, but to secure the Pittsburgh Titans' immortality. The members of its small alumni body, the school graduates only about 250 students a year, are unlikely to have extra millions on hand for the next capital campaign. More than 85% of the gifts the school gets comes from a group of 100 or so benefactors, virtually none of whom, by the way, is an alumnus. In 2015, pledged their largest gift yet, $20 million, to be spent at the discretion of the administration and trustees on whose board sits. with a major condition attached. The entire college had to be renamed Joan Well Paul Smith's College. As it turned out, the college's founder, the son of Paul Smith, a hotelier of some renown, had stated in his will that the school he was endowing was to be forever known as Paul Smith's College of Arts and Sciences. Forever was seen to be a word without vagueness. But you know lawyers, a case can be made for anything, and once the president and trustees declared that the charter's definition of forever must be flexible just so that the institution could endure, many hurdles were cleared. And with that bit of bad news, the Whales rescinded their gift. According to Titan Ron Chernow's biography of the co-founder of Standard Oil, Rockefeller also believed that plastering your name on a university, as fellow tycoons Carnegie and Leland Stanford had, fostered dependency. More recently, in 2014, the chair of Columbia Sportswear was revealed as the secret patron behind a $100 million bequest to the Oregon Health and Science University, which seemed odd since had given significant gifts before publicly. It's often assumed that anonymous giving is one of those bygone values, like a taste for simple things, unsuited to the affluent of today. Still, he says most donors don't know very much about the financial incentives of giving aggressively, but they are interested in knowing how their gift can have the best impact possible. Naming rights, or rather renaming rights, have become a touchy issue in these gilded times because the size of some gifts to established institutions can rival the amounts they were required to build them in the first place. Nearly always, the subtext is the brashness not merely of big money, but of new money, what aptly called the horsey and sporting set. The Geffen gift has ended up causing the biggest stir on the nonprofit circuit in years. Paul Mellon built the National Gallery of Art, but he didn't request that it be named for him. In 2008, when Schwarzman made his gift to the library, Jamie Johnson, and heir to the August Johnson and Johnson family, wrote about just that in his blog for Vanity Fair. Old guard wasps appeared to feel threatened by the newly rich and their growing influence around the city and dismissed new money as tasteless and gauche. That probably has something to do with the desire to be recognized and accepted beyond one's own people. But ultimately, it is the donor's money, and I do understand that often older patrons tend to be thinking about their legacy. Hamilton's own sensibility is revealed by the winky nature of the recognition his own family foundation requested in exchange for a gift to the Chamber of Music Society of Lincoln Center at Alice Tully Hall. But there is no plaque or public acknowledgement. So money, 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 money. When it comes to bequests and donations and funding, it's that money, 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 money. Just going to the Social Security and law, it's you get a whole lot of things, especially money and power. And sometimes it could seem like somebody's bank account. I've just learned that somebody's bank account, that appears to have 200 or 300 or $20 million in it could be worth less than somebody's bank account that has $1 in it. And that's what I learned. And I get that when it comes to accepting money, for whatever reason. Beauty, health, and wellness. Jamie Rawson. A container's design is often a blueprint to the scent it holds captive. The soaring curves of Lubin's Talismania bottle suggest exoticism and elegance, though that's where the similarity between the scents within ends. Upper Ten presents as a boozy ginger ale, where Corrigan calls to mind a gentleman in the spice trade, with its notes of juniper, berry, and saffron. A look at some of the most valuable cars in the world and the eccentric personalities behind the wheel. Let's see if we can share any. Lo and behold, Helen Nice, a former cabaret dancer, earned the nickname the Bugatti Queen. I woke up in my Bugatti. I remember doing that. It was like Future's Bugatti is missing. You know, is there an update? Has no Future's Bugatti is still missing. He has not found his Bugatti yet. Will he ever? Or is it Mission Impossible? I woke up in my Bugatti. Hella nice. Evidently a former cabaret dancer earned the nickname the Bugatti Queen. Restoring a car is as complicated as it looks, but the hardest part is knowing when to stop. Never restored a car, but I do really like the car that I have now. It reminds me of like an older car made new into a new version. So I do kind of like the older looking cars. Um, and I think like the Volkswagen Beetle is one of those. And I was like, I don't care how much money I get, like I still want me a Volkswagen convertible. Like I want me, just a simple little thing, a Volkswagen convertible, but I don't want the emblem. Like how much does it cost to not have the emblem? Like even though it's interesting, it doesn't go with my piece. So can I just have Volkswagen? Can you just have the word Volkswagen on it? Is that too much to ask? In and around the vehicle. Can you just not use your VW? Three outspoken experts drink and squabble their way through Burgundy. Kevin Conley. If you've ever been to an art fair in Miami or Hong Kong, it's hard to miss the quiet omnipresence of BMW. Behind the scenes, the company is funding shows and projects that consistently place it at the forefront of cultural achievements, but put forth by great institutions around the world. BMW's head of cultural engagement puts it. Warhol had to be persuaded not to paint over the windshield, since all the art cars actually raced in competition. The series continues. John Baldessari and Cal Fay, at 85 and 38, the oldest and youngest artists ever selected for the honor, will be the next to use the cars as canvases. The completed works are often exceptional, and they present museums with a conundrum. BMW will lend the works to retrospectives, but will not undermine that gesture by then sponsoring the exhibit. Called For Whom the Bell Tolls, the work is elusive and hard to summarize, but as John points out, if it were so conceptually contained that you could quickly give people the punch of the idea, it probably wouldn't need travel to be realized. Kevin Conley. For me, when I went to Hong Kong, it was the Benz people. They were on the buses, you know. So I don't know if it switched from the Benz people to the BMW people, but they had definitely made their way into public transportation. Sleeping Beauty. Some people's ideal bed is a heavily upholstered, button-tufted behemoth that's so high off the ground you need a stepladder to get into it. Okay, so I guess I'm the opposite, because I just saw myself with like a bed close to the ground, but really large, really long, but close to the ground, not above the ground, but close to the ground. I'm just sharing everything about me live. The backstory. Just a little of my backstory. Nicole Nichols. Some of them complain about abdominal pressure, pain, or weakness even years after giving birth. Whether your client gave birth 6 weeks or 6 years ago, follow these guidelines and exercise to restore functional strength to the core, the diaphragm, pelvic floor, tummy, and stabilizing muscles. As the belly expands, the abdominal stretch and the back muscles shorten. Even the diaphragm changes to accommodate the growing belly, affecting breath mechanics. The rib cage slides backward out of the way of the pregnancy, resulting in short, shallow chest breaths. When all of these physical changes combine in pregnancy and beyond, there's a big change in how the muscles interrelate and how women coordinate all their muscles, explains BSc MPT, a physical therapist who specializes in post-pregnancy. For moms, she will still be sleep deprived, sore, and perhaps a little blue or overwhelmed. Notes creator of the Belly Beautiful Workout, prenatal and postnatal DVDs. The muscles that became weakened, tightened, and overstretched during pregnancy affect alignment and form postpartum too. If your client has to hold her breath or use poor form to perform any exercise, the challenge is too great. Encourage mom to be mindful of her body while she cares for her baby, to breathe with intention, to sit and stand with good posture and alignment. It usually takes 4 to 8 weeks after giving birth for the gap to close, according to PhD creator of the Poise Core Training System. And a few of that exercise of that core program. Basic breath. Right off the bat, women need to learn to breathe. Begin with the basic breath to engage the abs. Alternate sides, extending the other leg out, and then back in to complete one rep. Begin with the basic breath to engage the abs. Exhale to raise one leg to tabletop position, knee in line with hip, shin parallel to the floor. Instruct client to exhale and return leg to tabletop position. Then bring foot back down to the starting position. Work up to 5 repetitions on each side without stopping, building to 20 hovering repetitions on each side before she moves to the next level. Begin with a basic breath to engage the abs. Then exhale to bring legs up one at a time to tabletop position. Keep a knee bent. Slowly lower one foot down to the floor on an inhale. Then exhale to return to tabletop. Begin with a basic breath to engage the abs. Then exhale to bring legs up one at a time to tabletop position. Begin with a basic breath to engage the abs. Then exhale to bring legs up one at a time to tabletop position. On inhale, slowly lower both legs toward the floor as far as she comfortably can without moving her lower back. Nicole Nichols. Victor M. Parichin. You have to be flexible to do yoga. Reality. Actually, yoga is most beneficial to those who are not flexible. In her book, Yoga for Americans, explains the difference between yoga and gym exercises. Yoga poses are an art applied to the anatomy of the living body, whereas gymnastics are a form of engineering applied to the muscles of the body. And yoga relaxation is taught as an art, breathing as a science, and mental control of the body as a means of harmonizing the body, mind, and spirit. While yoga does have a spiritual component, the basic philosophy is to use what is helpful and pass on what isn't resonating with you. Furthermore, yoga tones the entire body, is safe because it does not impact and provides a total body workout. A foundational principle is that we carry within us 3 healers: an inner physician to heal the body, an inner psychiatrist to heal the mind, and an inner priest to heal the spirit. I like that. I think I'm going to Facebook that. 3 healers, an inner physician to heal the body. Let's do it live together. We carry within us 3 healers. And healers is in parentheses. Not parentheses, quotes. An inner physician to heal the body. an inner psychiatrist to heal the mind, and an inner priest to heal the spirit. The inheritance. So we're gonna post that on the Late Show BT's Facebook page. So I'll read that again. A foundational principle is that we carry within us three healers: an inner physician to heal the body, an inner psychiatrist to heal the mind, and an inner priest to heal the spirit. Dr. McCall says that while he was in India researching yoga benefits, he visited centers that treated people with all kinds of physical, mental, and emotional problems. Old people, stiff people, people in pain, people who were too depressed to get out of bed. Those in bed or wheelchairs can do yoga modified for their needs. An individual session versus a class is safer and more beneficial because the poses are designed specifically for you and your needs. Victor M. Perriton. George L. Redmond, PhD, MD. This is evidenced by the proliferation of stress-related diseases that have become commonplace, such as accelerated aging, adrenal exhaustion, anxiety disorders, arthritis, autoimmune disorders, cancer, chronic inflammation, depression, digestive disorders, heart disease, high blood pressure, immune system dysfunction, menstrual irregularities, sexual dysfunction, ulcers, and weight gain. Dr. Bruce S. McEwen, PhD at Rockefeller University, who incidentally is advisor, states that chronic stress impairs brain health by weakening the excitability of nerve cells and by accelerating the deterioration of nerve cells in the hippocampus, the region of the brain that is important for spatial and verbal memory. In reference to immune health, Dr. McEwen describes the immune system as a structure controlled by the nervous system and by circulating hormones that chronic stress eventually shuts down. This term represents the wear and tear on the body that builds up over time when individuals are exposed to repeated bouts of chronic stress. Essentially, the importance of all of the body's adaptive responses is represented by the term allostatic, meaning focuses on maintaining system-wide stability or homeostasis in the midst of internal physiological chaos. For example, to combat some obvious life stressors, work, financial difficulties, death of a family member, a new birth, and/or a serious illness, develop a regimen to include the following. 1. Reorganize your life, establish some goals, and avoid haphazardly approaching projects. 4. Focus beyond the problem. Break major occurring or reoccurring problems into smaller parts, solving each piece individually until the whole problem is solved. And 11, be considerate and respectful, curbing the notion that every minor detail has to be accounted for. They cite some alarming numbers concerning the amount of prescriptions written in the U.S. related to stress. 3 billion doses of amphetamines, 5 billion doses of barbiturates, and 5 billion doses of tranquilizers yearly. An innovative study conducted by researchers at Carnegie Mellon University showed for the first time how psychological stress is associated with the body losing its ability to regulate the inflammatory response, resulting in an uncontrolled situation characterized by continued tissue destruction and the development of a wide range of age-related disorders. He helped her realize that the routine she was having trouble perfecting wasn't something she was emulating based on the movements or skill of a previous routine or person. George Redman. So, yes, evidently a new birth can be considered a life stressor. Which I find that to be interesting. Is what if a new birth can relieve some stress? Kevin McGuire. It's not about being thin, but soon after giving birth to her first child, something dramatically changed in her body. Over several doctor visits, she began to learn about how her body works and gained a better understanding that setting goals, including adding more physical activity and better nutrition, were things she needed to do to improve her life. She found the competitive atmosphere and military-style motivation of her coach to be challenging yet inspiring. She went on to become group fitness instructor and personal trainer. Her popularity as an instructor and motivator grew and led her to a stint as a trainer on Dale Cohn Ganas, from the creator of The Biggest Loser on Univision. Points out that when it comes to body image, some of the traditions in the Hispanic community needed to change. Nobody complained when I had gained the weight, but they complained when I started losing weight, she points out. And for those a bit intimidated by the gym or just the word exercise, offers this advice. You have to just move. You have to create this lifestyle that becomes a part of your day, whether it's jogging or dancing or walking or swimming. The best exercise to do is the one you like to do, because then you're actually doing it. Seems like the perfect match for those who would rather not spend their nights sitting at the bar, but love the atmosphere of the club and love a great, energetic workout. Burn classes also build motivation from within. Explain. Since it is a 6-week program, you have the same people showing up for those 6 weeks, so they build a camaraderie and support group. The Burn program also includes a fitness assessment and individualized nutrition plan with calorie goal and nutrient breakdown. See a rundown of the Burn class format, Pyro, Plyo, and then sidebar. The Biggest Loser creators are working on new show ideas and hopes to be part of one of them down the road. But she says nothing beats being live in the class setting. In the meantime, you can also keep up with her at www.bodybymaria.com, and you can bet that will be out in the communities raising awareness about heart disease, diabetes, and the importance of exercise and good nutrition. Athletic drills, 4 quarters of everything, from football to basketball to boxing. You will be trained like an athletic champion. Kevin McGuire. So I was like, let me try The Biggest Loser. You know, um, when I look, like, I think it's off the air now. Chris Nelson. It takes 2 weeks to build, which involves hand shaping a reinforced resin shell over a nice cushy interior. 2 weeks to build. What would be the point? When I read this, the first thing that came to my mind would be, what would be the point in paying an astronomical amount of money for something to be built in 2 weeks? It takes 2 weeks to build, but they don't even have the 2 weeks that it takes to build it. And then you found yourself in danger, because they didn't have the 2 weeks. So it's just, I don't care if it's 2 weeks, a day, 2 years. You want to have that, whatever is, necessary for it to be built properly, appropriately, without any mess, danger, intrusion. 8 of the best and 3 of the worst. Eric Spitznagel. He might still be here today if he hadn't gone out one night wearing a pair of high-waisted Wrangler jeans. The two bonded, and after Jenkins came back the next week to watch his new Denim Buddies open mic set, he told Bridges, "We need to record some songs." The only thing those two have in common is they're both good at basketball. Well, that's why, I was doing a visual to this. I started including, you know, the fashion part of it. We're not the fashion police, but, so it's not a situation where, if, sometimes when you look at a crime scene, they don't really think about that. Their perspective is, the bullets, what type of bullet it is, what type of gun, what type of weapon was used, where are the wounds. They're not looking at any details as to what clothes they were wearing. But sometimes, you just want to be mindful of those things. I need to be light to go fast, and I need to be fast to set records. Mark Abauzet. And he will be solo, aiming to become the first person to make it across entirely alone. But today, he is not alone. But these days before the journey, that pastry chef friend provides another benefit. He lets Ponchadolfo sit inside his freezer. But to hike the South Pole, he must leave while Italy is still warm. Better to find imperfections alongside bucket fields of vanilla than when immersed in the great icy white. This may be my last expedition. I am not as young as I used to be. But those are decisions for later. Mary Pyron. Starting next season and continuing until 2025, ESPN and Turner Broadcasting will together pay an annual average of $2.66 billion for the rights to air NBA games, nearly triple today's fee. The union contract they finally settled on split revenue 50-50, with players sacrificing in order to balance the owners' finances. The Milwaukee Bucks were sold to a group of hedge fund executives for $550 million. Ex-Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer bought the Los Angeles Clippers for $2 billion. And Forbes reported the average team is now worth $1.1 billion, 74% more than the year prior. The biggest union fight in NBA history will be waged by two newcomers. Between now and the negotiating table, what are you doing? Becoming stronger in my faith in the Lord and contributing to God as best as I can. That's a lot more basketball seen nationwide, but it doesn't guarantee good basketball. But the TV schedule is set before the season begins, leaving the league little flexibility if, say, a superstar is injured and a once hot team is no longer competitive. Let's be thankful we're part of it and not make each other look stupid. I think that's a good way to be. That you're I think that's a good attitude to have about the show. Let's be thankful that we're a part of the show, and don't make each other look stupid. You didn't know that? Hey, I didn't know it either. We don't know everything. Now it's time for the book. And this book came to me when I was in college. It actually came to me. It wasn't a fellow student. It was an instructor. And for some reason, I vaguely remember her saying, you know what, you should read Memoirs of a Geisha. You know, I don't know if it was something that she was, I don't know if she was in a book club and it was just interesting, or and she just wanted to share that experience of reading something that really spoke to her, or if when she read it, she saw me in it, or I came up, as a thought in it, and she was like, when she saw me, she was like, I need to say this, maybe this is something that you should read, and maybe that's why you're coming to mind. But yes, it was one of my instructors, and she was like, you should read this book. And so shortly after that suggestion, I picked it up. I remember that, it didn't take me a long time to read it because I became very, enthralled in it. Um, it was published in 1997, it says. The film came out in 2005. So I had already graduated when the film came out. I just recently saw the film this year. Um, 97, I was still in school, so it had to have been that same year that it came out that I picked the book up. Shortly after that, we would go to um, on a trip. So I don't know if it was one of those things that she was doing prior to going to um, an Asian country, um, but I picked it up. I couldn't put it down. But again, I just saw the movie and it was an interesting movie. I liked, you know, it was an interesting movie, um, especially the part where the mother smacked. I think her name was Hatsumomo, because she was, caught having sex with Kochi. That was, and she was like, hold her down. The other lady she had the pole and she went in front of her and she pinned her down, with the she was trying to, you know, have the other girl beat as a thief when she hadn't, done anything. And she was like, no, no. She, while the lady was beating her, she's like, no, no, I caught her having sex. She was having sex with Kochi, and she was like, hold her. She held her. The other lady held her and she, did this and she smacked her with it. I was like, wow. Woo! That was something. So if you get the chance to view it, definitely view Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Logan. Like, that was just profound to me, because if you just know a little bit about something about this community that we serve, and what that meant to that scene, like, she really deserved that smack. I think it was, I would say that it's, I'm like, the first thing I thought of was Raising the Sun when Mama smacked. I haven't even dissected that smack in Raising the Sun, but I was like, wait a minute, this smack might just have surpassed the smack in Raising the Sun. But again, I haven't dissected it. So I am going to start with the translator's note. At first, I was going to bypass it. However, evidently, it's from the Arnold Russell Professor of Japanese History from New York University. So I'm going to share it. So I haven't, so it's all live. We shared. It's all live. I haven't even had the chance, like I did with the show, to go in and do my highlighting. So it's going to be all live. Forgive me if I overlooked something, if I missed something, if I, you know, but how would you know? Because it's the Late Late Show with BT's version. Yeah. Um, but I tend to hope to be as thorough and very detail oriented when it comes to this version. But we'll see. And if I have to stop sometimes because of if it takes me to the movie and I want to share something, then I will do that. Not to prolong it to get to the end, but all right. So Memoirs of a Geisha. As for the young Japanese women dancing on the stage before me, I remember nothing of them except a vague impression of brightly colored kimono. But she leaves behind as well a record of herself that is far more complete, more accurate, and more compelling than the lengthy chapter examining her life in the book Glittering Jewels of Japan, or in the various magazine articles about her that have appeared over the years. If she had remained in Japan, her life would have been too full for her to consider compiling her memoirs. One day I asked if she would ever permit her story to be told. When she had doubts about where to proceed, okay, scratch that. I regarded myself as the foundation upon which the enterprise was based and felt that her story would never have been told had I not gained her trust. Sayuri chose me as her amnesis, to be sure, but she may have been waiting all along for the right candidate to present himself. Geisha may not take any formal vow of silence, but their existence is predicated on the singularly Japanese conviction that what goes on during the morning in the office and what goes on during the evening behind closed doors bear no relationship to one another and must always remain compartmentalized and separate. But when she wished to bring a scene to life before me, her voice could make me think there are 6 or 8 people in the room. Sometimes still, I play her tapes during the evenings in my study and find it very difficult to believe she is no longer alive. And that was the translator's note. But the truth is that the afternoon when I met Mr. Tanaka Ichiro really was the best and the worst of my life. I wasn't born and raised to be a Kyoto geisha. In all my life, I've never told more than a handful of people anything at all about Yorito, or about the house in which I grew up, or about my mother and father, or my older sister, and certainly not about how I became a geisha or what it was like to be one. Most people would much rather carry on with their fantasies that my mother and grandmother were geisha, and that I began my training in dance when I was weaned from the breast, and so on. He tried his best to smile, though it didn't come out well because he couldn't get the look of shock off his face. I don't much like thinking of myself as a cup of tea made in a bucket, but I suppose in a way it must be true. I decided our tiny house must have been offended by the ocean, sneezing in its face from time to time, and took to leaning back because it wanted to get out of the way. Probably it would have collapsed if my father hadn't cut a timber from a wrecked fishing boat to prop up the eaves, which made the house look like a tipsy old man leaning on his crutch. Well, I think I can scratch that too. So I don't much like thinking of myself as a cup of tea made in a bucket, but I suppose in a way it must be true. Well, a peach has a lovely taste, and so does a mushroom, but you can't put the two together. This was a terrible trick nature had played on her. So already I'm like, this is stuff that wasn't in the movie. Even when he summoned a look of concentration, you could run outside and drain the bath in the time it took him to rearrange his features. They had stern looking black characters written top to bottom on them, but I hadn't attended the school in our little village long enough to know where one ended and the next began. I went back to those graves not long afterward and found as I stood there that sadness was a very heavy thing. For example, if you asked her to pour a bowl of soup from a pot on the stove, she would get the job done, but in a way that looked like she spilled it into the bowl just by luck. Our parents might have had other children besides Satsu and me, particularly since my father hoped for a boy to fish with him. But when I was 7, my mother grew terribly ill with what was probably bone cancer. Though at the time I had no idea what was wrong. Her only escape from discomfort was to sleep, which she began to do the way a cat does, which is to say, more or less constantly. As the months passed, she slept most of the time and soon began to groan whenever she was awake. But by the time I was 9, the bones in her face had begun to protrude, and she never gained weight again afterward. My father was at home that day because a terrible storm was coming. In his usual spot on the floor with his two big spider-like hands tangled up in a fishing net. My father came to join him, and they sat together at the table in the center of the room. She's in terrible pain. But if you've ever seen a bird trapped inside the great hall of a temple looking for some way out, well, that was how my mind was reacting. My father went on sitting for a long while in silence with his back to me. He wore no shirt, but only his loose-fitting skin. The more I looked at him, the more he began to seem like just a curious collection of shapes and textures. I didn't want to be away from him, but whether he was there or not, the house would be just as empty when my mother had left it. Our tiny Buddhist altar rested on an old crate beside the entrance to the kitchen. It was the only thing of value in our tipsy house. In front of a rough carving of Amida, the Buddha of the Western paradise, stood tiny black mortuary tablets bearing the Buddhist names of our dead ancestors. The path from our house followed the edge of the sea cliffs before turning inland toward the village. Walking it on a day like this was difficult, but I remember feeling grateful that the fierce wind drew my mind from the things troubling me. Was life nothing more than a storm that constantly washed away what had been there only a moment before and left behind something barren and unrecognizable? I'd never had such a thought before. Usually, the water was spotted with fishermen, but today I could see just a few boats coming back, looking to me as they always did like water bugs kicking along the surface. The fishermen on the inland began to soften as they disappeared within the current of rain, and then they were gone completely. I ran across the street toward the Cotta house where dry goods were sold, but then something happened to me, one of those trivial things with huge consequences like losing your step and falling in front of a train. I knew I was wet from the rain, and bloody too, and that I was barefoot and dirty and wearing peasant clothing. I lay there on that slimy table while Mr. Tanaka examined my lip, pulling it down with his fingers and tipping my head this way and that. To me, he seemed to see the sap bleeding from the trunks of the pine trees and a circle of brightness in the sky where the sun was smothered by clouds. He lived in the world that was visible, even if it didn't always please him to be there. I knew he noticed the trees and the mud and the children in the street, but I had no reason to believe he'd ever notice me. I thought he was going to tell me to leave, but instead he said, "Don't swallow that blood, little girl. Here, where we bring the fish." He beat her with a stick, and then washed out the boat with sake and lye so strong it bleached streaks of coloring from the wood. I'd say her blood would be the cleanest thing to hit this floor since you or I were born. I thought it would be terrible to just Tanaka, but I'm not sure I would have found the courage to spit if one of the men had leaned to the side and pressed a finger against one nostril to blow his nose into the floor. After seeing this, I couldn't bear to hold anything in my mouth a moment longer and spat out the blood just as Mr. Tanaka had told me to do. You won't have trouble finding him. I imagined Mr. Tanaka would go back to his work after Sugi had left, but instead he stood near a table alone while looking at me. I felt my face beginning to burn. The back of his head is as old as the front, but it's as smooth as an egg. After Dr. Miura tended to my lip and I bought the incense my father had sent me for, I walked home in a state of such agitation. I don't think there could have been more activity inside me if I had been an anthill. Somewhere between the various thoughts about my mother, somewhere past the discomfort in my lip, there nestled a pleasant thought I tried again and again to bring into focus. I stopped on the cliffs and gazed out to sea, where the waves, even after the storm, were still like sharpened stones, and the sky had taken on the brown tone of mud. Go outside and heat the bath, she told me, and brushed her unruly hair from her eyes with one of her wet hands. What amazed me most was that their unruliness appeared to be the very thing the Suji boy found fascinating about them. Shiyo-chan, why are you squatting there behind that tree? Considering that I was a little girl of 9, coming from a pond where I'd been swimming, and considering that as yet I had no shapes or textures on my body to conceal from anyone, well, it's easy to guess what I was wearing. Now, you tell me your sister can't even be trusted to make tea? Yes, me. Although back then, my name was Murihashi Ichiro. I was taken in by the Tanaka family at the age of 12. I looked for a moment at Mr. Tanaka's gray hair and at the creases in his brow like ruts in the bark of a tree. From that very moment on, I began to have fantasies that Mr. Tanaka would adopt me. Often when I felt troubled, I found my mind returning to the same image of my mother long before she ever began groaning in the mornings from the pains inside her. I was 4 years old at the Obon festival in our village, the time of year when we welcome back the spirits of the dead. Just inside the gate of the shrine was a clearing, decorated that evening with colored paper lanterns strung on ropes between the trees. My mother and I danced together for a while with the rest of the villagers to the music of drums and a flute, but at last I began to feel tired and she cradled me in her lap at the edge of the clearing. We watched the flame burn through the cord, and the lantern came floating down, till the wind caught it again and rolled it through the air right toward us with a trail of gold dust streaking into the sky. The ball of fire seemed to settle on the ground, but then my mother and I watched as it rose up on the current of the wind, floating straight for us. For a moment we were both awash in sparks and flames, but then the shreds of fire drifted into the trees and burned out, and no one, not even my mother, was hurt. A week or so later, when my fantasies of adoption had had plenty of time to ripen, I came home one afternoon to find Mr. Tanaka sitting across from my father at the little table in our house. I knew they were talking about something serious because they didn't even notice me when I stepped into our entryway. I understand, but they'd be much better off, and so would you. It's bigger than your Riedo. Just one night, you understand, and then I'll bring you back to your home again. How would that be? And I did my best to pretend no one had suggested anything out of the ordinary to me. Certainly, it was true that a part of me hoped desperately to be adopted by Mr. Tanaka after my mother died, but another part of me was very much afraid. After Mr. Tanaka had left, I tried to busy myself in the kitchen, but I felt a bit like Satsu, for I could hardly see the things before me. At length, I heard my father making a sniffling noise, which I took to be crying, which made my face burn with shame. When I finally forced myself to glance his way, I saw him with his hands already tangled up in one of his fishing nets, but standing in the doorway leading into the back room, where my mother lay in the full sun with the sheet stuck to her like skin. The next day, in preparation for meeting Mr. Tanaka in the village, I scrubbed my dirty ankles and soaked for a while in our bath, which had once been the boiler compartment from an old steam engine that someone had abandoned in our village. The top had been sawed off and the inside lined with wood. The men carried the full baskets to Mr. Tanaka's horse-drawn wagon and arranged them in the back. I tried to reassure them by saying, "You're going to the town of Senzuro, little fishies." At length, Mr. Tanaka came out into the street and told Satsu and me to climb onto the bench of the wagon with him. One of the sea bass was thrown out and hit the ground so hard it was jolted back to life. I turned back around with tears in my eyes, and though I tried to hide them from Mr. Tanaka, he noticed them anyway. Little bass, oh little bass, speed yourself to Buddhahood. We sank it to a flounder in the back, lying in a low basket by itself, with its two button eyes on the side of his head shifting around. I could see the thatched roofs of the town around the inlet, amid dull hills, and beyond them the muddy-colored sea, broken with shards of white. Even the ocean had a terrible odor, as if all the fish in it were rotting. The boats were scratched up. Some of their timbers cracked. They looked to me as if they'd been fighting with one another. When she wasn't smoothing her kimono, she was wiping something from the corner of her eye or scratching her nose, all the while sighing as though she felt very sorry there was so much fidgeting to be done. I gave a little bow, to which Mrs. Fidget responded with a nod. Then she gave the biggest sigh she'd given yet, and began to pick with one hand at a crusty patch on her neck. I had certainly seen Satsu naked before, but the way Mrs. Fidget handled her body seemed even more indecent to me than when Satsu had held her bathing dress up for the Suji bowl. Mrs. Fidget took her by the shoulders and seated her on the platform. I had no bosoms for the old woman to move around, but she looked under my arm just as she'd done with my sister and turned me around too, before seating me on the platform and pulling my. When she tried to spread my knees apart, she had to slap me on the leg, just as she slapped Satsu, which made my throat begin to burn from holding back my tears. But I was afraid if Satsu or I began to sob like little children, we might look bad in Mr. Tanaka's eyes. The older one has far too much wood, but the younger one has a good deal of water. I'm sure they're both attractive girls in their way, he said. When Mr. Tanaka had closed the door behind them, I turned to see Satsu sitting on the edge of the platform, gazing upward toward the ceiling. I felt myself to blame for what had happened and wiped her face with the corner of my peasant shirt. When she heard this, Satsu began to blink as if a bug had crawled into her eye. In a moment, her eyes had begun to squint, and I could see she was hard at work bullying herself to believe that nothing was going to take us from our tipsy house. Slowly, her face began to relax again, and she sat down once more on the edge of the platform. The glade of pine trees surrounding it smelled as richly as the ocean back on the sea cliffs at our house, and when I thought of the ocean and how I would be trading one smell for another, I felt a terrible emptiness I had to pull myself away from, just as you might step back from a cliff after peering over it. And when Mr. Tanaka stepped up into his entryway, he left his shoes right where he walked out of them, because a maid came and stole them on a shelf for him. The difference between life here at the Tanaka's house and life in Yoro Ito was as great as the difference between the odor of something cooking and a mouthful of delicious food. As it grew dark, we washed our hands and feet at the well, and went inside to take our seats on the floor around a square table. The brightness of the room was startling. I'd never seen such a thing before. Soon the servants brought our dinner, grilled salted sea bass, pickles, soup, and steamed rice. But the moment we began to eat, the lights went out. I'd expected Mrs. Tanaka to be glamorous, but she looked like an older version of Satsu, except that she smiled a great deal. After dinner, she and Satsu began playing a game of Go, and Mr. Tanaka stood and called a maid to bring his kimono jacket. At the end of a stone walkway between two houses, we came to a window covered with paper screens that shone with the light inside. Mr. Tanaka struck me as Kaneko took another turn peeking through the hole, and then we went back to her house and sat together in the bath at the edge of the pine forest. A warm feeling of gladness began to swell inside me, and I whispered to Kaneko, "Did you know I'm going to come and live with you?" Mrs. Tanaka's house had smelled of smoke and pine, but ours smelled of her illness in a way I can't even bear to describe. I could only endure seeing her this way by remembering how I'd once felt stepping out of the bath with her while she was strong and healthy, when the steam had risen from our pale skin as if we were two pieces of boiled radish. To begin with, I wondered, how could we go on living without my mother? It turned out to be Mr. Suji, Mr. Tanaka's assistant, running up the path. I didn't like this, but I ran up to the house and found my father sitting at the table, digging grime out of a rut in the wood with one of his fingernails. I heard my mother cry out in her sleep from the back room. She hadn't even bothered to clean the charcoal off her hands. While wiping her hair away, she ended up with a smudge on her face. Mr. Suji will be riding in the front with me, he said, so you and Shizu-san had better get into the back. She climbed into the back of the wagon and sat down among the empty fish baskets, putting one of her hands flat onto the slimy planks. I decided to explain it to both of them when we reached the Tanaka's home. The wagon came to a stop a few minutes later on a patch of dirt beside the train tracks just outside the town. He struck me as he struck me as out of place in Shinjuro, particularly there beside the farmers and the fishermen with their crates and an old henchwoman wearing a rucksack of yams. While I tried my best to soothe myself with these thoughts, Mrs. Fidget, wearing a pleasant smile, led Satsu and me some distance down the dirt platform. She looked around to be sure no one was watching, then hit us on the tops of our heads. But the train is coming, Mrs. Fidget said. Mr. Tanaka led us back up the platform to where the farmers and old women were gathering up their things. When I peered out the window, I saw Mr. Tanaka walking back toward his car and Mrs. Fidget wiping her hands all over her kimono. Because the way my sister said my name, she hardly needed to say anything more. What a stench, the both of you. He took a comb from his drawstring bag and began tearing it through her hair. In a moment, Sassu's lips turned down like a baby's and she began to cry. Even if she'd hit me and yelled at me, I wouldn't have ached as much as I did watching her whole face tremble. An old peasant woman with her teeth bare like a doll's came over with a carrot for Sassu, and after giving it to her, asked where she was going. We got off the train at last in a large town which I took to be Kyoto, but after a time another train pulled into the station and we boarded it. By the time we arrived as evening was approaching, I felt as sore as a rock must feel when the waterfall has pounded on it all day long. But then to my astonishment, I caught a glimpse of rooftops reaching as far as the base of hills in the distance. Even to this day, the sight of streets and buildings from a train often makes me remember the terrible emptiness and fear I felt on that curious day when I first left my home. Back then, around 1930, a fair number of rickshaws still operated in Kyoto. In fact, so many were lined up before the station that I imagine no one went anywhere in this big city unless it was in a rickshaw, which couldn't have been further from the truth. Wherever he was taking us, I preferred it to being cast out alone into that great expanse of streets and buildings as foreign to me as the bottom of the sea. We climbed into a rickshaw with Mr. Beku squeezed tightly on the bench between us. I heard a horrible screech, which turned out to be a streetcar on tracks in the center of the avenue. The way they were all packed together, they seemed to share one continuous facade, which once again gave me the terrible feeling of being lost. It may have been the first time we'd ever completely understood each other's feelings. I had been impressed with the kimono worn by the young buck-toothed geisha in Mr. Tanaka's village of Senzura, but this one was a water blue, with swirling lines in ivory to mimic the current in a stream. Glistening silver trout tumbled in the current, and the surface of the water was ringed with gold wherever the soft green leaves of a tree touched it. And her clothing wasn't the only extraordinary thing about her. Her face was painted a kind of rich white, like the wall of a cloud when lit by the sun. I like to be on my way. After this, Hatsumomo walked away, using such tiny steps that she seemed to glide along with the bottom of her kimono fluttering just a bit. But I never saw them leave because I was slumped down in the entryway in tears. I thought at once that the mother of this woman, whoever she was, must be very old, because Auntie's hair, knotted tightly at the back of her head, was mostly gray, with only streaks of black remaining. Auntie led me through the doorway, where I found myself standing on a dirt corridor, passing between two closely spaced structures to a courtyard in the back. One of the structures was a little dwelling like my house in Yorito, 2 rooms with floors of dirt. It turned out to be the maid's quarters. In Yorito, the wood structures were more gray than brown and rutted by the salted air. These elegant rooms turned out to be for the use of the family, and also Hatsumomo, even though, as I would come to understand, she wasn't a family member at all. She turned out to be a girl about my age, carrying a wooden bucket so heavy with water that she sloshed half of it onto the dirt floor. She was straining to carry the bucket, and her tongue stuck out of her mouth just the way the stem comes out of the top of a pumpkin. When she put down the bucket near me, Pumpkin retracted her tongue and then brushed a strand of hair behind her ear while she looked me up and down. I thought she might say something, but she just went on looking as though she were trying to make up her mind whether or not to take a bite of me. Just then, Auntie came out from the kitchen and, after shooing Pumpkin away, picked up the bucket and a scrap of cloth and led me down to the courtyard. It had a beautiful mossy look, with stepping stones leading to a storehouse in the back, but it smelled horrible because of the toilets in a little shed along one side. An old woman who turned out to be the cook came down to the corridor with several elderly maids to peer at me. Auntie told them they would have plenty of time for staring another day and sent them back where they had come from. If you work very hard, you'll grow up to be a geisha yourself. And they'd better like what they see. I didn't dare look at them, but what I could see out of the corner of my eye made me think of two lovely bundles of silk floating along a stream. Bring tea for Granny. Now, Granny, said a raspier voice, which I took to be Mother's. Auntie only wants to be sure you're comfortable. I heard her taking a breath to say something more, but Auntie interrupted. This is the new girl, Mother, she said, and gave me a little shove, which I took as a signal to bow. I got onto my knees and bowed so low I could smell the musty air wafting from beneath the foundation. She set it down beside her on the walkway and then brought from the pocket of her sleeve a drawstring bag of silk, from which she removed a big pinch of tobacco. She patted the tobacco with her little finger, stained the burnt orange color of a roasted yam, and then put the pipe into her mouth and lit it with a match from a tiny metal box. I was so curious about her that my eyes took on a life of their own and began to dart about. They hadn't been born in the same family, but Granny had adopted them both. And to make things more horrible, each of her lower teeth seemed to be anchored in a little pool of blood at the gums. This was due to some sort of deficiency in Mother's diet over the past years, as I later learned, but I couldn't help feeling, the more I looked at her, that she was like a tree that has begun to lose its leaves. I was so shocked by the whole effect that I think I must have taken a step back, or let out a gasp, or in some way given her some hint of my feelings, for all at once she said to me in that raspy voice of hers, "What are you looking at?" This must have been the right answer. if there was a right answer, because she let out something of a laugh, though it sounded like a cough. Auntie stepped around in front of me and tipped my head back to look at my face. Auntie, be kind enough to trim her hair, just to be sure. You'll learn to behave or get a beating. Do as you're told, don't be too much trouble, and you might begin learning the arts of a geisha 2 or 3 months from now. I didn't bring you here to be a maid. I didn't want Mother to see me crying, but the tears pooled in my eyes before I could think of how to stop them. I had no doubt life would never again be the same. All the girls studying to be geisha took classes at this same school. I felt sure I'd find Tatsu there when I was finally permitted to go. So by the end of my first week, I made up my mind to be as obedient as a cow, following along on a rope in the hopes that Mother would send me to the school right away. But even though I worked as hard as I knew how, I never seemed to make the good impression I hoped to, because my chores every day were more than I could possibly finish, and the problem was made a good deal worse by Granny. Can't you see this room is too hot? She said to me as I bowed to her on my knees. By the time I was finally free to leave, Mother's tea had grown so cold I couldn't even deliver it. Both the cook and Mother were angry at me. The truth was, Granny didn't like to be alone. I almost felt sick the first time she unfastened her robe and pulled it down from her shoulders, because the skin was there and on her neck was bumpy and yellow like an uncooked chicken's. China clay turned out to be poisonous to begin with, which probably accounted in part for Granny's foul disposition. I was terrified of Hatsumomo, even though I hardly saw her because of the busy life she led. I couldn't think why it should be so much bigger than everyone else's until one of the elderly maids told me that even though Hatsumomo was the only geisha in the Okiya now, in the past there had been as many as 3 or 4, and they'd all slept together in that one room. When I went up to her room that day, in addition to the usual magazines strewn about and brushes left on the mats near her tiny makeup stand, I found an apple core and an empty whiskey bottle under the table. The window was open, and the wind must have knocked down the wood frame on which she hung her kimono from the night before, or perhaps she tipped it over before going to bed drunk and hadn't yet bothered to pick it up. But let's have you repeat it back to me just to be sure. I can't see why you girls from fishing villages smell so bad. That ugly sister of yours was here looking for you the other day, and her stench was nearly as bad as yours. I kept my eyes to the floor until then, but when I heard these words, I looked Hatsumoma right in the face to see whether or not she was telling me the truth. But I must have stumbled out of the room because the next thing I knew, I was slumped on the wood floor of the hallway, holding my hand to my face. I thought you were probably too busy to do it yourself. Mother summoned a maid and asked for several slices of fresh ginger, then took me into her room and seated me at the table while she finished the telephone call. She was always to be found there, sitting at the table, usually with an account book from the bookcase open before her and the fingers of one hand flicking the ivory beads of her abacus. Whenever she put her pipe down onto the table with a click, flecks of ash and tobacco flew out of it, and she left them wherever they led. And the paper screens over the windows were stained terribly on account of her smoking, which gave the room a gloomy cast. He seemed to have only three pastimes in life: to bark, to snore, and to bite people who tried to pet him. This was one of his little tricks. He liked to put himself where I would step on him by accident and then bite me as soon as I did. I was beginning to feel like a mouse caught in a sliding door, positioned there between Mother and Taco, when at last Mother hung up the telephone and came to sit at the table. I'm terribly sorry. She may seem like a difficult old woman to you, but really she spends her whole day thinking of ways to be helpful to Hatsumama. Mother had a peculiar mouth, which was much too big for her face, and hung open much of the time. But now she did something with it I'd never seen her do before, which was to pinch her teeth together as though she wanted me to have a good look at them. This was her way of smiling, though I didn't realize it until she began to make that coughy noise that was her laugh. Lately, the weather had been dry, and the toilet had begun to stink. Those towels in the noonday sun felt like hot skillets to me. While I emptied the bucket, I couldn't help but think of the cold water at the pond where we used to swim back in our village on the seashore. Auntie called up to me to pick the weeds from between the towels before I came back down. I thought of her when I bumped the tank by accident. Water splashed out and flowed toward the street. About a month after I arrived in Nokia, Mother told me the time had come to begin my schooling. I was to accompany Pumpkin the following morning to be introduced to the teachers. When Pumpkin heard she would be taking me to school the following morning, she grew very nervous. You'll have to be ready to leave the moment you wake up, she told me. The following morning, I awoke even earlier than usual and dressed for the first time in the blue and white robe students wore. It was nothing more than unlined cotton decorated with a childlike design of squares. I'm sure I looked no more elegant than a guest at an inn looks wearing a robe on the way to the baths. As it turned out, she didn't keep me more than 10 or 15 minutes, but by then tears were welling in Pumpkin's eyes. And I know it's true too, because my mother brushed up against a demon that passed her on the road one morning, and that's why she died. But then my mother died when I was 5, and my father sent me to live with an uncle. Do what they say, and you'll always be taken care of. But I sooner throw myself off a cliff than swallow my chance to be a geisha like Hatsumama. Still, I didn't think she was really planning to eat the squid until I started to look up and down the street to be sure no one was coming. I'm bigger than they are, she said. But to see Pumpkin standing there holding that piece of squid on a stick with grit from the street stuck to it and the flies walking around, she blew on it to try to get rid of them, but they just scampered to keep their balance. I felt a knot in my stomach when I entered because the garden seemed so grand to me. Two old women in kimonos stood on it, holding lacquered umbrellas to block the early morning sun. The massive building in the back was actually the Kobarenjo Theater, where the Geisha of Gion performed dances of the old capital every spring. Pumpkin hurried to the entrance of a long wood building that I thought was servants' quarters, but which turned out to be the school. Pumpkin went to the board and took from a shallow box on the mats a plaque bearing her own name, which she hung on the first empty hook. The board on the wall, you see, was like a sign-up sheet. Pumpkin was so troubled about being the last student in all of her classes that she began to write to ring the sash of her robe as we left the school for breakfast at the Rokia. We ate a bowl of soup and returned to the school as quickly as we could so that Pumpkin could kneel in the back of the classroom to assemble her shamisen. The body is just a little wooden box with cat skin stretched over the top, like a drum. In any case, Pumpkin assembled her shamisen and began to tune it with her tongue poking out, but I'm sorry to say that her ear was very poor and the notes went up and down like a boat on the waves without ever settling down where they were supposed to be. When the students bowed to her in unison and told her good morning, she just glowered back at them without speaking a word. Finally, she looked at the board on the wall and called out the name of the first student. After she glided to the front of the room, she bowed before the teacher and began to play. I could see that Pumpkin was nervous, and in fact, the moment she began to play, everything seemed to go wrong. Slapped the table very loudly and told them all to face straight ahead, and then she used her folding fan to tap out the rhythm for Pumpkin to follow. Pumpkin picked it up and came back to her place with tears in her eyes. After this, I learned why Pumpkin had been so worried about being the last student. Don't waste your time trying to be courteous to me. The girl apologized and soon began to play, but the teacher paid no attention at all. How do you expect me to teach you when you can't take the trouble to come to school like the other girls and sign up properly? Just go back to your place. I don't want to be bothered with you. The class was dismissed, and Pumpkin led me to the front of the room. We bowed to Teacher Mouse. Pumpkin wasn't trying to insult me. This was just the way people spoke back then, when they wanted to be polite. Put your name on the board as early every morning as you can, she told me. I began to worry that perhaps I would never see her again and grew so upset that one of the teachers, just before beginning the class, silenced everyone and said to me, "You there, what's troubling you?" And to make good on this, for the sake of the girls around me who were staring, I gave a sharp bite on my lip and tasted blood. The singing class later in the morning was more difficult for her since she had a poor ear, but there again, the students practiced in unison, so Pumpkin was able to hide her mistakes and move her mouth a great deal while singing only softly. "I'll do my best to teach you about singing," she said, "so long as you manage to stay alive." I was expecting something very grand, but it turned out to be nothing more than several dark tatami rooms on the second floor of the school building, filled with desks and accounting books and smelling terribly of cigarettes. A clerk looked up at us through the haze of smoke and outed us into the back room. There, at a table piled with papers, sat the biggest man I ever seen in my life. I didn't know it at the time, but he'd once been a sumo wrestler. And really, if he'd gone outside and slammed his way into the building itself, all those desks would probably have fallen off the tatami platform onto the floor. And a good enough sumo wrestler to take a retirement name, as some of them do, but he still liked to be called by the name he'd used in his wrestling days, which was Awa Jiumi. But the way she spoke, I wouldn't have been surprised if she had run out of breath in the middle because it sounded like this. Awaji-san! He put down his pen where he heard her voice, and his two big cheeks shifted up toward his ears, which was his way of smiling. Maybe you're just too pretty yourself to be able to see it elsewhere, Awajiyumi said, opening an account book and picking up his pen. Tell me your first name, Chio, and your place of birth. I thought how Simone would be furious with me, but to my surprise, she seemed almost pleased by the question I asked. When I returned to the Okiya, Auntie was waiting to take me to the bathhouse down the street. I'd been there before, though only with the elderly maids, who usually handed me a small towel and a scrap of soap and then squatted on the towel floor to wash themselves while I did the same. Afterwards, she took me back to the Okiya and dressed me in the first silk kimono I ever worn, a brilliant blue with green grasses all around the hem and bright yellow flowers across the sleeves and chest. I didn't understand it at the time, but now I know perfectly well why she was so concerned. It may be true that she wears a startling hairstyle, even as she struggles to open her eyes, but in every other respect, she is a woman like any other, and not a geisha at all. Many geisha used it as a face cream in those days because it was believed to be very good for the skin, but it was so expensive the Hatsumomo put only a few dots around her eyes and mouth. Because I knew that in an hour or so, men would be gazing with astonishment at that face, and I would still be there in the Okiya looking sweaty and plain. But Hashimoto was no fool. She knew how to bring out the beauty in her features. But for the moment, she left her face like a bizarre white mask and asked Auntie to paint the back of her neck. This is why geisha wear the collars of their kimono so low in the back. The first few bumps of the spine are visible. I suppose it's like a woman in Paris wearing a short skirt. Auntie painted onto the back of Hashimoto's neck a design called Sambon Ashi, 3 legs. It makes a very dramatic picture, for you feel as if you're looking at the bare skin of the neck through little tapering points of a white fence. What happened next made very little sense to me at the time because the complicated costume of kimono is confusing to people who aren't accustomed to it. To begin with, you must understand that a housewife and a geisha wear kimono very differently. But a geisha wears kimono so frequently she hardly needs any padding, and bunching never seems to be a problem. Both the housewife and a geisha will begin by taking off their makeup robes and tucking a silk slip around the bare hips. We call this a koshimaki, hip wrap. For the next item, the underrobe isn't really an undergarment at all. Also, she wore white socks we call tabi, which button along the side with a snug fit. At this point, she was ready for Mr. Beku to dress her. Kimono are the same length no matter who wears them, so except for the very tallest women, the extra fabric must be folded beneath the sash. Wrapped around the waist, it covers the area from the breastbone all the way to below the navel. Most people who know nothing of kimono seem to think the obi is simply tied in the back as if it were a string, but nothing could be further from the truth. Mr. Beku took several minutes to tie Hatsumomo's obi. Auntie and I followed Hatsumomo back into her room, where she knelt at her dressing table and took out a tiny liqueur box containing rose for her lips. She used a small brush to paint it on. White makeup causes all sorts of curious illusions. If a geisha were to paint the entire surface of her lips, her mouth would end up looking like two big slices of tuna. So most geisha prefer a powderier shade, more like the bloom of a violet. Unless a geisha has lips of this shape to begin with, and very few do, she nearly always paints on a more circle-shaped mouth than she actually has. After it had burned for a few seconds, she blew it out, cooled it with her fingertips, and then went back to the mirror to draw on her eyebrows with charcoal. When she slipped them into her hair, she applied a bit of perfume to the bare flesh on the back of her neck and tucked the flat wooden bow into her obi afterward in case she needed it again. The job of waiting up to bow and welcome the geisha home almost always fell to the most junior of the cocoons, as the young geisha in training were often called. The bar of light that fell across my empty futon made me think of a day, not long before Satsu and I were taken away from our village, when I appeared into the back room of our house to see my mother asleep there. Hatsumon will be very angry if she found me sleeping, so I try my best to look alert. But the telephone hadn't been ringing much tonight, and I thought probably Yoko had fallen asleep just as I had. She had to be connected with several tea houses before she at last located Atsumomo and left a message that the kabuki actor Ono Shikan had come to town. I didn't know it at the time, but there was no Ono Shikan. This was just a code. This turned out to be a good thing because when Atsumomo appeared 20 minutes later, she stopped and entered all to say to me. Occasionally, I thought I heard a soft whimper or a groan, but the sounds were so quiet I couldn't be sure. I won't say I knew just what they were doing in there, but I did think of my sister holding up her bathing dress for the sushi bowl. Once a week or so, Hatsumomo and her boyfriend, who turned out to be a chef in a nearby noodle restaurant, came to the Okiyo and shut themselves in the maid's room. Hatsumomo would certainly have been in trouble for having a boyfriend, much less for bringing him back to the Okiyo. I never never really understood why Hatsumama took the risk of bringing her boyfriend back to the Okiya, though probably it was the risk itself that excited her. When she stood erect and looked down on me, her lips looked unnaturally big and heavy at the bottom of her long face. She has a name, I think, but why don't you just call her Little Miss Stupid? I poured two glasses of beer instead and brought them out. I could see they were very drunk, and Hatsumama's friend had feet much too big for her little wooden shoes, so that she could hardly walk a step without the two of them breaking out in laughter. Hatsumama had just set the packages down onto that walkway and was about to open one of them when I delivered the beer. Hatsumama's friend, Corin, admired it so much that she drew in a sharp breath and choked on her own saliva, which caused them both to burst out laughing again. Corin was still coughing a good deal, but when she was able to speak, she said, "I wish it belonged to me." And when I went back to look for it, I heard what I thought was moaning coming up from the basement stairs. What maid has enough money to buy a kimono? I had no choice but to obey. A narrow corridor passed between these two walls of cases, with slatted windows at the ends, covered over with screens for ventilation. The space was lit harshly just as below, but much more brightly, so that when I stepped inside, I could read the black characters carved into the fronts of the cases. To tell the truth, I couldn't understand all the characters at the time, but I did manage to find the case with Hatsumomo's name on it on the top shelf. I had trouble taking it down, but finally I added the new kimono to the few others, also wrapped in linen paper, and placed the case where I found it. By the time I returned to the courtyard, Hatsumomo had been up to her room to fetch an inkstone and a stick of ink, as well as a brush for calligraphy. When it was good and black, she dipped a brush in it and smoothed its tip against the stone so that all the ink was absorbed in the brush and none of it would drip. This kimono, belonging to the geisha named Mamiha, whom I had never heard of at the time, was a work of art. Weaving its way from the hem up to the waist was a beautiful vine made of heavily lacquered threads punched together like a tiny cable and sewn into place. The leaves curling from it seemed to be fading and drying in the autumn weather and even taking on tints of yellow. When the brush first touched the kimono, Corin was so excited she let out a squeal that woke one of the elderly maids, who leaned out into the corridor with the cloth around her head and her sleeping robe sagging all around her. Hatsumoma stamped her foot and made a sort of lunging motion like a cat, which was enough to make the maid go back to her futon. There wasn't any meaning to them. Hatsumoma was just trying in her own way to be artistic. She and Cora went back to the front entryway to put their lacquered Zori back on their feet. We walked along in the moonlight for a block or so, beside the weeping cherry trees that drooped down over the black water, and finally across a wooden bridge arching over into a section of Guyana I'd never seen before. I was trembling with fear so much I could go no farther than halfway up them before I came to a stop. Even then, amid all my fears, I couldn't help noticing how extraordinary Hatsumomo's beauty was. Corn looked uncomfortable in her formal hairstyle with all its lovely ornaments, and her kimono seemed to be always in her way. The girl kneeling on the other side was no older than Satsu, but thin and nervous as a bird. The futon was for the geisha mamiha. I could tell because of the crisp sheets and the elegant silk cover, as well as the taka makura, tall pillow, just like the kind Hatsumomo used. I felt terribly sorry for her as she dried her eyes quickly against one sleeve. The next morning after lessons, I came back to Lokia to find that mother, granny, and auntie were closed up together in the formal reception room on the first floor. I feel terrible about the kimono, but I had no idea what she meant by them. Does that suggest I ought to be extremely fond of you, auntie, since you're such a failure? There'll be none of that, said mother. You don't really think anyone is empty-headed enough to believe your little story. I don't know what happened last night, but there's no dispute about who was holding the brush. Now Granny came out from the reception room and called a maid to fetch the bamboo pole. The girl should be beaten and made to repay the cost of kimono, and that's that. Where's the bamboo pole? Auntie waited until the maid brought the pole and then led me down to the courtyard. Or you can grow up to be an ugly woman like me. When the beating was over, Auntie left me crying there. Soon I felt the walkway tremble under someone's footsteps and started to find Hatsumon was standing above me. So I began thinking about how I might sneak to this place called Tatsuya the very next time I had an opportunity. To begin with, I wasn't sure how to find the Tatsuya. A young maid had run away from the Kia next door only a few months earlier, and they brought her back the following morning. They beat her so badly over the next few days that her wailing was horrible. I decided I had no choice but to wait until my 50-day confinement was over. Soon I discovered that the cook had taken it upon herself to punish me further over the kimono incident, even though no one had asked her to, by cutting back on my twice monthly portions of dried fish. I even took a chopstick one day and gouged a hole in the bottom of a canvas bag of rice, so she had to take everything out of all the cabinets and search for signs of rodents. When I reached the Mizuku tea house, rain was beginning to fall, but the entrance was so elegant I was afraid to set foot in it. The walls beyond the little curtain that hung in the doorway were a soft orange hue, trimmed in dark wood. A path of polished stone led to a huge vase holding an arrangement of twisted branches from a maple tree with their brilliant red leaves of fall. I remember being astounded that all the beauty I'd seen wasn't even the entryway to the tea house, but only the path leading to the entryway. And a tea house isn't for tea, you see. It's the place where men go to be entertained by geisha. A year earlier, I would have taken her to be the young mistress of such an extravagant place. But now, after my months in Gion, I recognized at once that her kimono, though more beautiful than anything in Yoruba, was far too simple for a geisha or for the mistress of a tea house. Go to the back, she said. Go to the back, she said again, and rolled the door shut without waiting for me to reply. The door at the back entrance rolled open as I arrived, and the same maid knelt there waiting for me. She gave me a strange look, but then told me to walk along the river until I had passed the Minamiza Theater, and I would find myself in Miyagawa-cho. As I stood looking around, I discovered a wing of the building visible between the slats of the fence beside me. Inside a lovely tatami room, beige and orange light, a party of men and geishas sat around a table scattered with sake cups and glasses of beer. Hatsumon was there too, and a bleary-eyed old man who seemed to be in the middle of a story. She kept glancing at another geisha with her back to me. So I stepped back and sank into the stone step at the entry with the door against my back and began to cry. I would never go back to Yoruido, I decided. Or if I did go back, it would only be to tell Mr. Tanaka how much I hated him. I made my way back to the Tominaga-cho section of Jian to the Minamiza Theater with its enormous tiled roof that had made me think of the palace the day Mr. Beku brought Satsu and me from the train station. The maid at the Mizuku tea house had told me to walk along the river past the Minamisa, but the road running along the river stopped at the theater. So I followed the street behind the Minamisa instead. I didn't know it at the time, but the streets were empty, mostly because of the Great Depression. In another era, Miyagawa-cho might have been busier even than Guyana. That evening seemed to me a very sad place, which indeed I think it had always been. The wooden facades looked like Guyana, but the place had no trees, no lovely Shirakawa stream, no beautiful entryways. The only illumination came from light bulbs and open doorways where old women sat on stools, often with 2 or 3 women I took to be geisha on the street beside them. They wore kimono and hair ornaments similar to geisha, but their obi were tied in the front rather than the back. These were zori woven coarsely from straw, the sort you might have seen in Yoruido, and not at all like the beautiful lacquer zori Hatsumomo wore with her kimono. What was more, this old woman's feet were bare, rather than fitted with a smooth silk tabby. And yet she thrust them out with their uneven nails, just as though she were proud of the way they looked and wanted to be sure you noticed them. Her name used to be Satsu. I remember. I don't get myself into trouble for nothing. She beckoned me with her hand, and when I neared her, she took me by the arms and spun me around. If our Yukiyo was as pretty as this one, we'd be the busiest house in town. So I turned myself around and gave her a bow and said to her, I apologize if I seem to be a liar, ma'am. This must have been the right thing to say because at last she turned to the young woman across the alley. You're not busy tonight. The old woman stood to bow and thanked him for coming. She gets beaten whenever a girl escapes. I suggested we meet near the Memoirs Theater, but Sansu thought it would be too easy for people to find us. Just be there, Chio. You have to go now before the mistress comes back. I would have watched her go up the stairs, but in a moment the old woman from the doorway had taken me by the arm and pulled me out into the darkness of the street. I was just beginning to settle down, now that I had succeeded in not getting caught. But then I looked at the door to the maid's room and saw that it stood open a bit, just wide enough to reach an arm through, and I felt myself go cold. I began to wish I hadn't gone to Miyagawa-cho. I wished it so hard that if such a thing had been possible, I think time itself would have begun to run backward just from the force of all my wishing. Because of the damp weather, Yoko had lit charcoal earlier that evening. The brazier set into the floor. Only a faint glow remained. In that dim light, something small and pale was squirming. It seemed to be standing up on top of something. I couldn't tell what. Stretching out toward me were two bundles of what I thought were probably rolled up fabric, which gave me the impression it had chewed its way up between them, spreading them apart as it went. I hurried back to kneel in the hallway, feeling as shaken as I had almost been run over by a trolley. I'll meet you anywhere you say, on the bottom of the riverbed even. Hatsumoma shouted at her, "Go back to sleep, you stupid old woman," and the maid shook her head and lay back down again. I don't want to get in trouble with mother, and you're already in trouble. The sooner you're out of here, the better for me. Whatever she was holding in her fist, she wanted to tuck beneath the sash of my robe, but when she stepped toward me, I backed away. I understood that she wasn't really helping me at all. She was helping herself to be rid of me. She turned me around to face her again and began to stroke the side of my head with her hand, wearing an almost motherly gaze. The very idea of Hatsumoma behaving kindly toward me was so odd, I felt as if a poisonous snake had come up and begun to rub against me like a cat. And here she began to beat me. By that time, Auntie had come to join her on the landing. "Oh, Mother," Hatsumoma said, "on my way back to the Okia this evening, I thought I saw little Chio at the end of the alleyway talking to a man. She isn't supposed to be out of the Okia at all." She sold my emerald brooch to that horrible man. Before the spider had even finished his job, a mosquito flew right into the web and was trapped there. Auntie took Hatsumoma by the arms and held her from behind, while Mother began to pull open the seams of Hatsumomo's kimono at the thigh. I don't think the maids could have been more upset with me if I had actually stolen the food from their bowls with my own hands. And as for Pumpkin, she began to cry when she found out what Mother had ordered. But to tell the truth, I didn't feel as uneasy as you might imagine to have everyone glowering at me and to have the cost of an obi brooch I had never seen or even touched added to my debts. I don't think Mother really believed I had stolen the obi brooch, though she was certainly content to buy a new one at my expense if it would keep Momo happy. As an extra measure, the job of sitting by the door in the evenings was taken away from me and given to Pumpkin instead. We had to wake Auntie to have the door unlocked when Momo came home. I grew so despondent I had no energy at all for my chores, and the maids chatted me for dragging my clock along the woodwork I was supposed to be polishing and pulling a broom along the corridor I was supposed to be sweeping. I spent a long while Monday afternoon pretending to weed the courtyard while really only squatting on the stones and brooding. Then one of the maids gave me the job of washing the wood floor in the maid's room where Yoko was seated at the telephone, and something extraordinary happened. I squeezed a rag full of water onto the floor, but instead of snaking along toward the doorway as I would have expected, it ran toward one of the back corners of the room. And then, well, I can't say exactly how it happened, but I picture myself flowing up the stairs to the second floor landing, and from there up the ladder, through the trapdoor, and onto the roof beside the gravity feed tank. The following evening, I made a great show of yawning when I went to bed and threw myself into my futon as though I were a sack of rice. I lay for a while. I lay for a long while thinking of my house and wondering what expression would form itself on my father's face when he looked up from the table to see me standing in the doorway. I didn't allow myself to picture my mother quite so vividly. Just the thought of seeing her again was enough to bring tears to my eyes. I listened to Granny chanting sutras, which she did every night before going to bed. She looked strangely pitiful to me while she fumbled to unfold the sleeping robe she picked up from the table. I remember very well that one day back in Yorito, a boy pushed me into a thorn bush near the pond. By the time I clawed my way out, I was mad enough to bite through wood. If I hadn't already resolved to run away, I'm sure I would have been terrified to think of the suffering that probably lay in wait for me in Guyana. But I comforted myself with the thought that by the following day I could begin forgetting even my memories of Guyana. I would have no choice but to take my chances in the dark. Even if I did make it down without hurting myself, reaching the street would be only the beginning of my troubles. By then, the maids were snoring loudly. Like Granny, Mother slept with the lamp on her table illuminated. So when I opened the door, crack, and peered in, I could see the parched bottoms of her feet sticking out of the sheets. Taco lay between her feet with his chest rising and falling, making that wheezing noise that sounded so much like my name. To make matters worse, they were much too big for me, but I had no other option. The roof of the building next door was a step lower than ours. I climbed down onto it and stopped a moment to look for a path to the street. But despite the moonlight, I could only see a sheet of blackness. The roof was much too high and steep for me to consider sliding down it on a gamble. I wasn't at all sure the next roof would be better, and I began to feel a bit panicky. But I continued along from ridge to ridge until I found myself near the end of the block, looking down on one side into an open courtyard. From the top of the bev shed, I could climb down into the courtyard easily. In all likelihood, someone would be waiting at the front door for the geisha to return and would grab me by the arm as I tried to run out. But then my foot dislodged one of the roof tiles, which slid down with a clattering noise and shattered in the courtyard below. I had the sense to bring an arm up to protect my head, but still I landed so heavily that I knocked myself into a daze. They talked between themselves and then picked me up from the moss and set me on the wooden walkway. I began to cry in earnest now, for I knew what was coming. I heard nothing more of what she said because of the terrible screams from farther up the walkway. It was late afternoon already by the time I was brought back to the Okia with a plaster cast on my arm. I was still in terrible pain, but mother called me immediately to her room. I suppose you could repeat after 10 or 15 years as a geisha, she went on, if you happen to be a success. She'd been talking to me pleasantly enough until then, but after my apology, she put her pipe on the table and stuck out her jaw so much, from anger, I suppose, that she gave me the impression of an animal about to strike. My lip was trembling when I left, but I held my feelings in, for there on the landing stood Hatsumomo. I'd learned this the morning before and felt certain Hatsumomo was going to blame her troubles on me. It was very rude of me, but I bowed to Hatsumomo and slid open the door to let myself out without replying. Back when I was a little girl, 5 or 6, and had never so much as thought about Kyoto once in all of my life, I knew a little boy named Noboru in our village. All that bitter cold winter, I wondered what had become of Sasu and my mother and father. To comfort myself, I closed my eyes and imagined that I was walking along the path beside the sea cliffs in Yoido. Hatsumon was busier than usual during the daytime because of all the blossom viewing parties. I envied her the bustling life I saw her prepare for every afternoon. I'd already begun to give up my hopes of awakening one night to find that Satsu had sneaked into our Kia to rescue me, or that in some other way I might hear word of my family in Yorita. I had no idea what could possibly be in the package, but seeing Mr. Tanaka's name there, you may find it absurd. But I honestly hope perhaps he'd recognize his mistake in sending me to this terrible place and had mailed me something to set me free from the Okia. I can't imagine any package that might free a little girl from slavery. I had trouble imagining it even then. But I truly believed in my heart that somehow when that package was opened, my life would be changed forever. Before I could figure out what to do next, Auntie came down the stairs and shooed me away from the box, even though it had my name on it. I began to get excited about what I might find inside, but when Auntie took off the lid, I felt myself all at once growing heavy. For there, nestled amid folds of white linen, lay the tiny mortuary tablets that had once stood for the altar in our tipsy house. For the moment, Auntie left the box there on the floor, with the tablets lined up so neatly inside, and took the letter from the envelope to read it. My hands were trembling in my lap as I knelt to the table, probably from the force of trying to keep all my terrible thoughts from rising to the surface of my mind. Or perhaps Satsu had asked that they be sent to me because she was on her way back. I don't think I breathed at all while she spread the paper out on the table. Dear Chia, 2 seasons have passed since you left Yorito, and soon the trees will give birth to a new generation of blossoms. As one who was once an orphan child himself, this humble person is sorry to inform you of the terrible burden you must bear. This humble person feels confident that both your honored parents have found their places in paradise. This humble person has been alive long enough to see 2 generations of children grow up and knows how rare it is for ordinary birds to give birth to a swan. The swan who goes on living in its parent's tree will die. This is why those who are beautiful and talented bear the burden of finding their own way in the world. Long before Auntie had finished reading this letter, the tears had begun to flow out of me just like water from a pot that boils over. But to learn in a single moment that both my mother and my father had died and left me, and that my sister too was lost to me forever, at once my mind felt like a broken vase that would not stand. She helped me set the tablets up on a shelf near the base of the stairwell where I could pray before them every morning. But there I was on the list with a little paragraph telling some things about me, including that I'd been born in Kyoto, which of course I wasn't. I've been again more than 6 months by the time I received Mrs. Tanaka's letter, and yet during that time I'd never for a moment given up the belief that I would one day find a better life elsewhere with at least part of the family I'd always known. I imagined my father coughing at the lonely table in his lonely house, and my mother so frail upon her futon that her body scarcely sank into the bedding. Then, in early spring, a full year after the terrible news about my family, something happened. I was about 12 by then and was beginning to look a bit womanly, even though Pumpkin still looked very much like a little girl. I found it strange to be the object of attention after being ignored for so long. His beard was so heavy that his features were a blur to me, as if someone had censored them from the film. But I continued thinking about it while I swept the stepping stones in the courtyard that morning until I began to feel the sort of buzzing in my head that comes from a thought circling and circling with nowhere to go, just like a bee in a jar. Soon I put down the broom and went to sit in their corridor where the cool air from beneath the foundation of the main house drifted soothingly over my back. I admired the lovely pattern on its wings and then wrapped it in one of the rags I was washing and hid it away beneath the foundation of the house. I hadn't thought about this moth since then, but the moment it came to mind, I got on my knees and looked under the house until I found it. It seemed to be wearing a robe in subdued grays and browns like Mother wore when she went to her mahjong games at night. If only one thing in my life had been the same as during that first week in Kyoto. As I thought of this, my mind began to swirl like a hurricane. My existence was as unstable as a stream, changing in every way, but the moth was like a piece of stone, changing not at all. What? And now the question confronting me was this: what would that future be? The moment this question formed in my mind, I knew with as much certainty as I'd ever known anything that sometime during that day I would receive a sign. This was why the bearded man had opened the window in my dream. Because that thing, when you find it, will be your future. I had no time for another thought before Auntie called out to me, Chio, come here. Heaven knows what Hatsumomo was up to last night. She came back to Lokio wearing another girl's ornaments. When I took the ornaments, Auntie gave me a piece of paper with a number of other errands written on it as well and told me to come back to Lokia as soon as I had done them all. Soon girls in their blue and white robes came pouring out. She snatched a little bundle from my hand and opened it. But I just thought you'd find it interesting that she's going to be a geisha and you never will. I won't say I wanted to become a geisha, but I certainly didn't want to remain a maid. Only have been heading back for lunch, but to me, they were going from one important thing to another with lives of purpose, while I, on the other hand, would go back to nothing more glamorous than scrubbing the stones in the courtyard. I was in an abandoned island in the midst of an ocean with no past, to be sure, but no future either. Why, it's too pretty a day to be so unhappy. Not only had this man bothered to speak to me, he'd actually spoken kindly. The noise and hubbub of so many people living their lives of purpose around me seemed to stop, or at least I ceased to be aware of it. I'll be happy to try to describe him for you, but I can think of only one way to do it, by telling you about a certain tree that stood at the edge of the sea cliffs in Yoida. They cast shadows suggesting eye sockets, and beneath the shadows was a gentle bump of a nose. The whole face tipped a bit to one side, gazing at me quizzically. It looked to me like a man with as much certainty about his place in this world as a tree has. Something about it was so meditative. I imagined I'd found the face of a Buddha. The man who'd addressed me there on the street had this same kind of broad, calm face. This man before me was so different from the usual chairman that even though I was only a little girl with limited experience of the world, I knew his company couldn't be a terribly important one. They bowed and went on their way while the chairman remained behind. No one of any importance had ever been in our village before that day. I think we all felt touched by nobility and greatness. Here you are, a beautiful girl with nothing on earth to be ashamed of, he said. How I would have loved to be the instrument he played. But when I saw the bundle he held in his hand, it looked so much like the shrouded moth. I knew I'd come upon the sign at last. I took the bundle and bowed low to thank him and tried to tell him how grateful I was, though I'm sure my words carried none of the fullness of my feelings. I wasn't thanking him for the coin or even for the trouble he'd taken in stopping to help me. In that brief encounter with the chairman, I had changed from a lost girl facing a lifetime of emptiness to a girl with purpose in her life. And I really do think if you'd been there to see what I saw and feel what I felt, the same might have happened to you. Now I understood the thing I'd overlooked. The point wasn't to become a geisha, but to be one. To become a geisha, well, that was hardly a purpose in life. But to be a geisha, I could see it now as a stepping stone to something else. Plenty of geisha had achieved tremendous success by the age of 20. He would be no older by that time than Mr. Tanaka was already. I climbed the steps, but I felt too intimidated to walk beneath the great two-story entrance gate with its gabled roof and walked around it instead. With my eyes squeezed tightly shut and my hands together, I prayed that they permit me to become a geisha. Somehow, I would suffer through any training, bear up under any hardship for a chance to attract the notice of a man like the chairman again. I could do nothing but tuck the chairman's handkerchief inside my robe and carry it with me back to the Rukia. I ran upstairs to fetch Auntie because I knew at once that something must be terribly wrong. Now that the month of September had begun and we were putting away the summer weight under robes, Granny had begun to use her heater again. That doesn't mean the weather was necessarily cool. We changed the weight of our clothing by the calendar, not by the actual temperature outdoors, and Granny used her heater just the same way. Over time, the hot metal burned all the way through the cord so that the wire finally came into contact with it, and the whole thing became electrified. I was surprised too to see Mother spending money almost unrestrainedly, making plans for sutras to be chanted on Granny's behalf at the Chayan in temple, purchasing lotus blood arrangements from the undertaker, all of it right in the midst of the Great Depression. The older geisha knew Granny from her working days, but the younger ones had never even heard of her. They came out of respect for Mother, or in some cases because they had a relationship of one kind or another with Hatsumomo. It was a distance of only a few steps, so the visitors couldn't very well show themselves in. And besides, I had to keep track of which faces belonged to which shoes, for it was my job to take the shoes to the maid's room to keep the entryway from being too cluttered, and then bring them back again at the proper moment. I had trouble with this at first. I found myself imagining how astounded the wives and daughters of the fishermen back in Yoredo would be to see such a thing. She wasn't as striking a woman as Hatsumomo, but her features were so perfectly formed that at once I began to feel even more insignificant than usual. Still, I was relieved when the time came for me to bow and leave them in the reception room. I began to worry, and I'm afraid my eyes and my mind weren't communicating well because even though I knew I shouldn't do it, I let my eyes flick up. "What is your name, little girl?" she said, in what I took to be a very stern tone. Auntie moved downstairs into the room that had been Granny's, while Pumpkin, who was to begin her apprenticeship as a geisha before long, to the second floor room where Auntie had lived. But already I was finding it difficult to bear the burden of patience in my life, waiting for some tiny opening that might never come and that would certainly be the only chance I'd ever get. Some nights when I went to bed, I took the handkerchief the chairman had given me and lay on my futon smelling its rich talc scent. I cleared my mind of everything but the image of him and the feeling of warm sun on my face and the hard stone wall where I had sat that day when I met him. It was an unseasonably hot October afternoon, and my whole body was damp with perspiration from using our old hand-operated vacuum to clean the tatami mats upstairs in Pumpkin's new room, which only recently been Auntie's. Pumpkin was in the habit of sneaking rice crackers upstairs, so the tatami needed to be cleaned frequently. I got to my knees and bowed to her. I felt certain I was in trouble. Arrange for yourself to be sent out tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock and meet me at the little bridge that arches over the Shirakawa stream. I certainly wasn't pleased that Mamiya's maid wanted me to accompany her somewhere. Probably to Mamiya, I thought, to be scolded for what I'd done. But just the same, the following day I talked Pumpkin into sending me on an errand didn't really need to be run. That didn't really need to be run. She was worried about getting into trouble until I promised to find a way of repaying her. They weren't the only foreigners I'd ever seen in Kyoto, but they certainly looked peculiar to me. The big-nosed women with their long dresses and their brightly colored hair, the men so tall and confident with heels that clicked on the pavement. Finally, Mamiya's maid came, and just as I feared, she led me over the bridge and along the stream to the very same doorway where Hatsumomo and Korin had handed me the kimono and sent me up the stairs. It seemed terribly unfair to me that this same incident was about to cause still more trouble for me, and after so much time had passed. Then I heard Mamiya call from the back room. "All right. Thank you, Tatsumi." The young woman led me to a table by an open window where I knelt on one of the cushions and tried not to look nervous. Very shortly, another maid came out with a cup of tea for me, because as it turned out, Mamiya had not one maid, but two. I certainly wasn't expecting to be served tea, and in fact, nothing like this had happened to me since dinner at Mr. Tanaka's house years earlier. I bowed to thank her and took a few steps so as not to seem rude. Mamiya's apartment wasn't large, but it was extremely elegant with beautiful tatami mats that were obviously new, but they had a lovely yellow-green sheen and smelled richly of straw. Looked closely enough at a tatami mat, you notice that the border around it is edged in fabric, usually just a strip of dark cotton or linen, but these were edged in a strip of silk with a pattern of green and gold. Not far away in an alcove hung a scroll written in a beautiful hand, which turned out to be a gift to Mamiya from the famous calligrapher Matsudera Kochi. At last, Mamiya came out from the back room, dressed exquisitely in a cream kimono with a water design at the hem. I turned about very low on the mats while she drifted over to the table, and when she was there, she arranged herself on her knees opposite me, took a sip of tea the maid served to her, and then said this. Now, Shio, isn't it? But I'm only interested to know if you've gotten yourself into trouble by coming here. I'm supposed to be on an errand fetching kabuki magazines and shamisen strings. Oh, well, I've got plenty of those, she said, and then called her maid over and told her to fetch some and put them on the table before me. When you go back to your Ikea, take them with you, and no one will wonder where you've been. I opened my mouth to speak, but the truth is, I wasn't sure what to say. That is to say, they both been trained by the same geisha. In this case, the great Tomihatsu, who was already an old woman at the time. Your Hatsumomo never liked young Hatsuoki, and when they both became apprentice geisha, she couldn't bear having her as a rival. So she began to spread a rumor around Gaian that Hatsuoki had been caught in a public alleyway one night doing something very improper with a young policeman. So here's what she did. Whenever she came upon someone very drunk, a geisha or a maid, or even a man visiting Gaia, it didn't matter. She whispered the story about Hatsuoki in such a way that the next day the person who heard it didn't remember that Hatsuomo had been the source. I felt a strange relief at hearing that someone besides me had been treated monstrously by Hatsumomo. She can't bear to have rivals, Mamiya went on. The Nita Okiya must be the wealthiest in Gion without an heir. By adopting Hatsumomo, not only would Mrs. Nita solve that problem, but all of Hatsumomo's earnings would then be kept by the Ukiya, without a single cent of it paid out to Hatsumomo herself. I'm sure Mrs. Nita knows perfectly well what sort of adopted daughter Hatsumomo would turn out to be, the sort that finds a way to drive the mother out. I backed away from the table and bowed low to the mats, but before I had a chance to say anything at all, Mamiya interrupted me. That would be a lovely bow, if only you were a farmer visiting Kyoto for the first time, she said. Look at me. Move farther away from the table. And you mustn't spread your fingers at all. I can still see space between them. I want to know why you're no longer training to be a geisha. You ought to be on your way to a successful career in Guyana. I told her about my debts, including the kimono and the brute Tatsumomo had accused me of stealing. We were supposed to meet on a certain night to run away together, but then I fell off the roof and broke my arm. A girl who runs away makes the mistress of her Okiya look bad. That's the way people think here in Guyana. That sort of thing. But what will you do with yourself now, Chio? It changes shape and flows around things and finds the secret paths no one else has thought about, a tiny hole through the roof or the bottom of the box. There is no doubt it's the most versatile of the five elements. She wasn't simply looking for revenge, unless I was mistaken. She wanted to be rid of Hatsumomo completely. Mamiya wanted to know if I could remember the date, which I managed to do after looking at a calendar with her. It had been the last Tuesday in October 1929, only a few months after Satsu and I were taken up from our home. Mamiya told her maid to bring an almanac for that year, and then, after asking my sign, the year of the monkey, she spent some time checking and cross-checking various charts, as well as a page that gave me a general outlook for the month. Here, Mamiya closed the book and peered at me. Many people have doubts about this sort of fortune telling, but any doubts you might have would certainly have been swept away if you'd been there to see what happened next. Perhaps not the best day for something as ambitious as running away, but certainly better than the other days that week or the next. This was the moment when I began to understand how unaware I'd been, not only in planning to run away, but in everything. You should go back to your Okiya, Chio, she said, and mention to no one that you've spoken with me. And I'm going to stop there. So we're stopping and we'll begin at chapter 11. And again, we're reading Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. Washington Post's book world claims it astonishing, breathtaking. You are seduced completely. This has been the Late Late Show with BT. Bye.